use it for now, and then we can get more of these. This is a really comprehensive flyer for a BLM area. I've never seen one quite this good. And it has a lot to do with the fact that this area has been studied very heavily, even though it's in a remote area. It's been studied for over 4 decades. And one of the most comprehensive petroglyph studies ever conducted happened here in the 70s, where they located over 21,000 individual pictographs on rocks. Most of them are petroglyphs, what we're going to see. So, just for a quick lesson, their pictographs are literally paintings on rock, and petroglyphs are when native cultures peck the surface of desert varnish off of typically basalt, which is what we're going to see here. I've created an amendment to the brochure, so if we could just hand some of these out, which just adds to the petroglyphs they got on there. And it might help us, this is good one for you, identify some stuff today, which we'll then talk about tomorrow. Here, test this. And our tour is SquatterMan 2022 because we're going to be talking about a unique set of glyphs here, and all of the morphologies of those glyphs are in this little pamphlet, which all have to do with one single concept that we'll talk about at the conference tomorrow. And I'll just give you a quick background on the idea of Peret's paper. If we were all here in a time in antiquity, when there was a huge solar photon storm that came from the sun, and we can just pick the SquatterMan event at 775, 774 AD. If we were all alive at 775 AD, as the sun was setting at the campground, just to the north here, what we would see is a spectacular feature in the sky, which is emanating from the North Pole. It would be emanating from the North Polar Aurora region. The auroral region is a ringed area that we're well aware of for decades, where the aurora emanates, and it's about 18 degrees from the rotational pole of Earth. Now, recent plasma physics have told us, and people like Birkeland, that this is a current. This is a circular electrical current that is coming in the North Pole of Earth, which goes out and it connects to the sun, and then it connects to other places in the solar system. This Birkeland current is where we get the Auroral Belt. Now, if you look at scale, and we'll see some slides tomorrow where you'll see the scale, the Auroral Belt is simply the illumination of the edge of that ring on the North Pole, just a few, maybe 100 miles up into the ionosphere. That's it. But if we were to multiply that power by 4 or 5, 10, 100 times, instead of getting aurora, the entire column would illuminate out into space, thousands of miles. So what we'd be looking at here would be a very significant feature in the northern sky that as soon as the sun started to set, you would see. Now, depending on how much power is coming into this Birkeland current, which we call the aurora, you would get different features in the sky. And we're going to see all of them today. You would get the Jacob's Ladder. I'm sure you've all heard of that. Which are these types of set of glyphs. Actually show the entire discharge feature in whole, in totality. Based on Peret's studies, the most amount of Z-pinches you can get in a plasma instability, which we would be seeing to the north here, is 9. And when you look at all the ladders, the biggest ladder you get, Jacob's Ladder, has 9 pinches. So you can get 9 or 7 or 5 or 4, and if you turn it all the way up, it's almost like, you know how we used to fold a dollar bill? When the highest plasma version is the SquatterMan. So all of the Z pinches collapse onto the final pinch, and you'll get the top and the bottom of the plasma discharge. So it literally looks like SquatterMan, and that's when the 2 dots would light up, which would be all of the 9 Z pinches collapsing to 1 Z pinch. So literally, you look to the north here, and it would probably cover a great portion of the sky. You would see a gigantic purple discharge of a SquatterMan. Or, in an earlier phase, with a lower charge, you would get an entire ladder that just goes up into the heavens. And this would be one of the lower discharges. Now, some of the oldest petroglyphs in the world are just these 2 eyeballs, and they're called the Wajinda in Australia and New Zealand. You've all seen the caves of the Wajinda. These can go back, they claim, 20 to 40,000 years. So the eyeballs that they're looking at there, the reason they're only seeing that is because they can't see the rest of this. And if you look at where these caves are, they're towards the equator. They're up in northern Australia. So if we were to go towards the equator and look back up at this discharge, most of Earth would be blocking it. So what they're looking at, when they were looking at the Wajinda, is just a portion of the discharge. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I add something here?
Yeah.
Just that, I mean, the giveaway of all of this too, right, is that geographical thing where people in various places are seeing the same things or a version of the same thing in the sky, which is why you find these kinds of petroglyphs all over the world.
And we just happen to be in the right latitude here, where we're far enough north that most of the visions that you can see that go up all the way to the North Pole where Santa lives, we would be seeing most of the entire discharge. So that's the whole idea. Now, real quick, are there any questions on plasma petroglyphs? Because tomorrow all your answers will be answered in my talk on the science of it and how they came up with all this. But are there any questions about that?
Question. Talk about Project Sapphire.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
In the electro theory of the universe?
It's still happening.
It's still happening? So
Yeah.
you still do believe that that's an actual possibility, even though that they can't prove it? Nobody can disprove it.
Yeah, the Sapphire is just them doing an experiment to prove the electric sun model.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if the electric sun is true or if the sun is liquid metallic hydrogen, like Robitaille thinks, or it is a thermonuclear machine that's burning out, like we all were taught in grade school. It doesn't matter, because we know that it discharges. There's coronal mass ejections, we know about the solar cycle, and we know about these historical solar photon events. So, that's a whole different argument.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. But I believe what the Sapphire Project is doing is the best science that there is. So real quick, let's go over the geology of this area. It's very interesting that the sedimentary rock that we're in here is the same exact rock where Leah and I live, 6 hours north of here. It is the Mesa Verde group, which is also Zion and Bryce and all those areas. So this sedimentary unit is very pervasive in the Four Corners area because it's flatline. So it's not bent or anything. So pretty much if you drive to the right elevation in the whole Four Corners region, if you're at the right elevation, you're going to be in the same sedimentary rock unit, which is not typical for most places. All out in Iowa and places like that in the middle, where not near plate margins, all the rock is flat. But out here, we're in all these volcanic rocks that we're going to look at today, and we have the Rocky Mountains, right? This is where the gold rush happened. So this, and we have mountains everywhere, right, over there? So the geology out here is unique, and that's why the Rocky Mountains are here and people come here. But only where the mountains occurred, where the volcanics pushed up, are there mountains. So it's a very unique spine in the Rockies that geologically, for some reason, pushed up out of the flat-lying rocks. It pushed up. It didn't get smashed and bent up. Everything's flat here, and the volcanics came up. And they all happened at the same time. All of the volcanics from here all the way up to Wyoming in the Rocky Mountains are all tertiary. They happen between 23 million and 30 million, that's an idea, years ago. And that's when all of the hydrothermal fluid, all the precious metals, all the minerals were placed here. All the crazy stuff happened here 23 to 30 million years ago. Since then, nothing has happened except some volcanic activity. Now, after that major emplacement of volcanism, which these basalts, this is a sill here. A sill is when magma gets intruded into sedimentary rock and forms a layer, as opposed to a dike, which would be when the sedimentary rocks crack and it shoots vertically up as it's stripped this way. So we're going to be looking at a sill, which is a flat-lying intrusion, which literally, as you drive up or leave, you can see it. It's sitting on top of the sedimentary rocks and it forms this hill. And the reason it makes a hill is because it's a type of basalt that's very impervious to weathering. So it's protecting the sedimentary rock below. And this basalt was squirted in here 23 million years ago or so. Now the reason there's so many petroglyphs here is because there's a phenomenon in the desert called desert varnish, where manganese oxide and iron oxide, in the presence of a bacteria, starts to form a coating on the rocks in the desert. And it's doing it by just taking a little bit of moisture out of the air and creating a chemical reaction. It takes a very long time. And these desert varnishes build up just like sheets of paper. And so now we have techniques where we can actually measure the thickness of the varnish and tell how old it is at different locations, because at this location, the desert varnish grows at a different rate than somewhere in Wyoming. Does that make sense? And so now they have a technique where, and you will see it here, about 90% of all the petroglyphs are from a group of natives called the Jornada Mogollon. And the Mogollon lived from here to this ridge and west into Arizona. And they didn't go up to the state line so much because there were many other tribes up there that didn't like them. So the Jornada Mogollon were here during the heyday of all Pueblo people, 900 to 1200 AD. That's the peak of the empire. And that's when all these petroglyphs are assumed to have been pecked. But what we're going to see is the majority are those petroglyphs, but when we quickly go off the trail, we'll see some petroglyphs that are much older than those petroglyphs. So that's the historical context here. And back to the desert varnish, we'll see evidence where the Jornada Mogollon glyphs, which are from 900 to 1200 AD, are very clear and sitting right next to other petroglyphs that have varnished over. So you can see that in a fresh glyph it's whiter because they got all the desert varnish off. And if that sits for thousands of years, that slow process of manganese oxide will build up and cover the glyph. And you'll all be like, hey, look, this is an old one. And some of them are so old that the desert varnish has now covered it over that you can't recognize it. And that's the unique thing about places like this. They're so vast, and you'll be so focused in on the amazing things you're going to see that you're going to miss 80% of it. It's crazy. And we go back to places that Rex and I have seen everything. And that's just not true. It's just not true. There's so much to be found here. This area is unique because most petroglyph sites are on cliffs where they were facing north and tapping on them. And the reason most people, so here's the cliff north, this is where most of the petroglyphs are. And so the reason that would be is because if they're doing mostly petroglyphs of things they're seeing in the sky, they have to be looking at it. So if my cliff is here and the north is there, this is where I'm tapping in the glyph. You can also do it this way, I guess, or any other way. But the majority of plasma petroglyphs, when you find them, or what we call that, are facing north. And that's just a unique phenomenon. We may or may not find that here. In fact, there are some Jacob's ladders here that face Sierra Blanca.
Yeah, you may notice too that some of the glyphs that face Sierra Blanca seem to be speaking about it. You'll see what I mean when you see them. So not necessarily like a Jacob's ladder, but a glyph that would suggest like a rain-making phenomena, which is really what mountains do.
Then there's one glyph at the top of the hill where it looks like a Spaniard. You know, the dude. And he's right here when you're looking at him, and you'd be looking literally at Santa Fe where they would be. So that's a pretty interesting phenomenon. Take notice of what you're looking at and then what's in front of you, and maybe what they might be describing. We're going to see step pyramids here. Which how many places have you seen them?
There's 10, 15.
Different sites.
Yeah, they all have different pictures on them.
Yeah, so there's a really significant thing to the step pyramid, not only in Egypt, but for the Pueblo period people. And here it might be nothing more than simply describing a mountain. Because when you see them, there's usually a mountain in front of them. And so it might be a type of map. This particular area, I think there might be a lot of maps. If you look at the anthropology of the area and what they say about the glyphs, most of it is nonsense because they don't account for anything that we're going to be talking about all weekend. and then if you go talk to elders, their stories don't match the stuff they write in the books. So definitely we don't know anything about any of it.
Well, even too, like sometimes glyphs will suggest something about the geography or the climate, but like bear in mind at the time the glyph was made, the climate might have actually been a bit different here.
Yeah, I was going to mention something also that Ransom just brought up. So you brought up that the Mountain of the Gods is close by here.
Yeah.
Now, as soon as he said that, I thought, okay, that's where they landed. Whether or not they were space people or highly advanced human civilization that had the capability to fly, I think that's where they landed, and I think the natives saw that, they were blown away, and then it talks about the 4 kivas and the 4 different peoples breaking apart, essentially, and going to different places, right, as you were saying?
This one, actually, with the Mescalero Apache, they believe the 4 teachers landed up here, and that's where they base all their teachings of, and it's all based around Sierra Blanca. They actually own the very top there, which is one of the few 12,000-foot summits that you can actually just walk to. So you can walk right up it.
I read they say it's 12,000 feet.
Well, so that reminds me also when you read about the ancient Sumerian stuff, where Oranos came out of the water to teach civilization what to do. They landed on, okay, what do? They land on top of a mountain. The natives are blown away. They go up there. They teach them civilization, culture, different ideas, different farming techniques, teach them about the stars, and then that information gets spread. And then you got the white sands over there, the 33rd degree parallel, and all these petroglyphs. The fact that they have that kind of patina that Diamond's talking about, I think it all matches perfectly, because I don't think that just because of the patina necessarily they would make all those petroglyphs. They had to have that to do it. But this place is sacred. I think this is like a sacred holy site, essentially.
Well, not only that, if you look at the terrain around here for probably 400 square miles, this is really the only habitable zone that you're going to find elk, deer, fish, stuff like that. Nice. And that's actually what's painted along the rocks. On a lot of it is telling you that there's food right here. And there's a lot of references to some kind of underpassage, or maybe on some of these step pyramids, you'll see they'll have different animal depictions above it. And below it, what looks like a doorway that the river goes in. So I don't know what that really references. But you'll see several of those. There's at least 5 of those, a step pyramid that either has a frog or birds. Really unique patterns. I don't know what they mean.
This area, the reason the Pueblo flourished in the entire 4 corners is because it was not like this. The climate was not like this. Something happened around 1210 where it got dry for a very long time. We're talking decades. And that was the end. And you can see all of the cliff-dwelling cultures and all the Pueblos at like by 1250, there's no one here, 10%. So everyone left because it got dry. And then the Spanish came and they overgrazed sheep from here to Canada, which left it drier. And now we have this. We've got this huge desert that goes from here to Canada.
And the weather patterns we're dealing
with right now? It was wet.
Now?
This is called 3 rivers because there are really 3 rivers. Like Ransom said, they all came together. It was awesome here. Annual SquatterMan 2022, and I want to thank you first, all of you, for making it here. That is quite an impressive achievement. We were trying to see how many people would make it to the most remote place in the entire planet, and we did a pretty good job. We got a dozen people out here, and we had some adventures yesterday. Rex and I have been going to Petroglyph areas probably for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And we've probably gone to a few dozen, I would say, we're approaching 50 trips.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say in the beginning, some of the stuff and the things that we both thought are completely different than the things we think today.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
And it's based on the experience of going to all these different petroglyph sites with an open mind, which I'll get to in my talk, and no preconceived notion. Now we're going in there with a model. It's the electric universe model. It's the Peratt model of the plasma discharge theory. And what we uncovered is that these petroglyphs, we find the same petroglyphs everywhere. It doesn't matter where we go. The same exact morphology, the same shapes. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. I have no idea what he's going to be talking about, except the title of his talk is Ancient Civilizations.
Yeah, uncovered.
Uncovered, or unearthed. Because in the process of doing all this work, we've had the opportunity to speak with elders of all different tribes. And it's interesting that they all have completely different things to say about what these mean. Some of them can agree with us and some of them can't. So without further ado, I'm going to shut the lights off. Rex Bear.
I think that's perfect. We're ready to roll. So SquatterMan 2022 Plasma Petroglyph Tour. Yesterday was awesome. What an experience.
And I want to thank you all for being here. I mean, I just feel super honored, super lucky to be here with all of you. And let's make this fun. Let's also learn. And let's see if we can take this to uncover new opportunities. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the bird and the Apollo mythology and the angelic mythology and the Ajiji. And if you haven't heard the Ajiji before, they're written about like ancient Babylon and Sumer. And some of these ancient cultures, I think we can find iconography that will actually connect to some of the native petroglyphs we're going to look at, which makes me believe, based upon the evidence, that there was actually a global trade network. And a lot of the petroglyphs are going to be based on plasma as well, which Diamond's going to be able to explain the science of that even better. I'll just do a quick outline of that. But this is kind of cool because this looks like the Leap Project logo. So I wanted to take a photo of that. And Ransom actually told me about this first, so I didn't see that before I came up with the idea for the logo. But I thought that's neat. The hand is usually a representation of like protection or healing, and so I just thought I'd show that. But let's first go to birds and creation. So myths from several regions associate birds with the creation of the world. One of several creation stories in ancient Egypt said that when land rose out of the primeval waters of chaos, the first deity to appear was a bird perching on that land. What's interesting is, when we look at a lot of these petroglyphs, we'll see birds coming out of the heads, or what appears to look like a bird coming out of somebody's head, an anthropomorphic figure. And so we have talked about maybe that is similar to the SquatterMan and like a plasma effect or something in the Aurora that people were watching, and they had to write that down in stone because they were so fascinated by it. And because of the chaos and creation that it brought, comets bring life, comets also bring destruction. I think that has something to do with the birds often appearing at the top of the head or above the heads, and oftentimes the birds are at the very top of the petroglyph panel, which seems to have like a supernatural or almost like a mystical, spiritual connection. And so supernatural related to forces beyond the normal world, magical or miraculous, deity, a god or a goddess. And if you look at some of the gods and the goddesses in Egypt and ancient Sumer, oftentimes you'll see them depicted, they'll have like a falcon. I think Horus has a falcon on his head, and that's really, I think, fascinating when you especially look at the creation myths of birds. And so this right here, it also can bring life, it can bring death, and it can be a carrier of the soul, the representation of the bird. So I thought I'd point that out first. And then this is a map of some of the places that we've actually gone and looked at petroglyphs. And we've been to Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, a lot of stuff in Utah. And even in California, there's a place called Blythe, California, and it's got these geoglyphs, which are on the ground. It's off the 33rd degree parallel, and you can actually see these glyphs from the air. They're that big. And we think that it's connected to the civilization in Peru that has all of those geoglyphs on the ground that you can see. And whether or not the aliens made them is debatable, but it was clearly a highly advanced civilization. And that also connects the possibility that these ley lines, like the 33rd degree parallel, there's certain energy that the Earth creates, like magnetic forces, that at a time, when they were traveling, they could use craft to, with the magnetic forces of the Earth, so they didn't need to use gasoline or jet fuel. But it's really interesting to get the 33rd degree parallel, which is where we were yesterday, looking at some of these in the Three Rivers petroglyphs area. That's off the 33rd degree parallel as well. And now let's take a look at some of the petroglyphs here. No, first I'm going to go to the Perot paper. And does anybody have any questions yet? Any comments? Okay, cool. So this is the Perot paper. The characteristics for the occurrence of a high current Z-pinch. And this was as recorded in antiquity. Anthony Perot is a legend amongst legends. And he works at Los Alamos, or he did work at Los Alamos. And he was doing experiments with like 1 million+ volts of plasma, and he was able to create these simulations in the laboratory as well as computer simulations that look like the petroglyphs that we were looking at yesterday, and many of the petroglyphs around the world, and some of the iconography with the gods and the goddesses in Egypt and ancient Sumer, which, based upon the evidence, I would say that could lead to some of these gods were attempting to mimic what they saw in the heavens, and sometimes the gods, the major gods, could be representing the planets, or actually constellations. It's astrotheology, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But this is the Birkeland current, and this is an artist's depiction of the Birkeland current flowing into and out of the Earth's atmosphere at high latitude. These currents, once the subject of intense debate, are routinely measured by today's satellites, and have total magnitudes of millions of amperes, mega amperes, and then scroll down a little bit here. This is a inflow of a current conducting plasma column, and this was using, I think, 5 million volts or 3 million amps of plasma to create what kind of looks like a SquatterMan. And then down here, they're getting instabilities in the laboratory in space using 1 to 1.3 million amps of plasma. This is like a plasma column. This looks similar to some of the petroglyphs that you're going to see. And
yeah, Rex, if you go back up to that upper paper, that page there,
yeah,
those are the actual experiments that Pratt did. He had no idea at this time that anyone was going to connect that experiment with petroglyphs when he did that. And he took those pictures of the spiral, and up on the top pictures, they call those funnels. They call them plasma funnels. Now the interesting thing is that the oldest petroglyphs, pictographs in the United States and North America are a particular style called barrier. And these are the gigantic funnel anthropomorphs. These are people that are shaped like giant triangles.
Or they look like big blocks sometimes.
And they're totally creepy. And so it was because of that, and I'll talk about the happenstance where someone said, hey, I think you got something here. Take a look at these petroglyphs. And then that's how all this began.
Yeah, those particular petroglyphs, they often look like big sort of blocky robots or these weird triangles, and they show up everywhere.
But in the archaeologists call them anthropomorphs, and everyone agrees that they represent people.
which I need to find. I want to show you those real quick.
Except us.
Sago Canyon, here we go.
Yeah,
these guys. So, no, that's newspaper
No, there's
rock.
one right up top, Rex. In that panel, there's one at the top of the panel.
I was going to show. I want to show you the robot-looking dudes, the real big ones. Here we go.
Yeah.
So these are the real old ones we were talking about, right, Diamond?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you can see, this guy right here, he looks like a robot. I mean, he's even got the like antenna thing. You think, or Marvin the Martian. And what's also fascinating is, let me go.
How many people shot at those petroglyphs?
Yeah, well, and they've actually been vandalized. Some have been vandalized since then, which is really, it's absurd. But I'm going to talk about this one in a minute. Don and I disagree on this guy. But it could be plasma, and it actually kind of looks like plasma now more I look at it. But where's the one I wanted to show you? No, that's not it. There's one in here, a comparison of two people in between the actual larger petroglyphs. And I'm not seeing it. Here we go, right here. See these guys? That's two people, right there. Two anthropomorphic figures. So I look at that as Adam and Eve. And then you've got these humongous petroglyphs, or pictographs, I guess, because they're actually, they're not just pegged in, they use some type of pigmentation to get those there. Look how much larger they are than these two people right here. So I'm wondering, are these actually beings? Are these shadows, possibly, of like a ceremonial dance? Or are they showing something that was happening in the heavens, possibly? Or is this just a cheat? But why don't they have arms? And there are a lot of these petroglyphs where they don't have arms, and they're very large, and they almost look like ghost people. It's really interesting. So I don't know what these are, but I find them fascinating by the size. But it does look kind of like tribal here, they're doing here. And if there was a shadow, if you're doing a ceremonial dance and there's a shadow, and that might be what the shadows could look like. But now I'm going to show you some of the other. So this is in Newspaper Rock. And you said, Leah, there was one on here that was this guy?
The top in the middle.
Right here?
The guy on the right.
The brown guy.
Yeah,
The brown guy.
the oldest ones, right? These are the older
That's
ones.
literally the Parad funnel.
Yeah.
So you think this is the Perot funnel right here?
Their picture is open right behind it. It's down the bottom right.
Yeah, we can just compare right now.
And you can even see the little evidence of the head in there.
See that?
Yeah.
I mean, this. And then when we were looking at those big columns yesterday, some of the big columns we were looking at look kind of like this in the experiment. And then this was, I think, the plasma. And was this the computer simulation, right?
The top one's computer, the one with the multiple lines there, yeah.
This one's computer.
Yeah.
And then this one's the plasma. And then you'll see a lot of these columns, and they could be like Jacob's ladder. And then you brought up also yesterday the Babylon, the fall of Babylon, the Babylon Tower. That was interesting.
Yeah.
So these are just different simulations that that Prod did in the lab. And I wanted to just show some of the petroglyph stuff here down here. I'll scroll through. Here we go. See all these different locations that they saw the SquatterMan. And then, here we can see SquatterMan. And then we can also see, there's some stuff on here that I find interesting. Here's the bear clan. But there's a couple handprints, big handprints that have like 6 fingers that I was going to show off. But I think is evidence of maybe the Nephilim, not like the biblical description, but a large race of people with six
toes.
Yeah, straight at the bottom.
Right there?
6 toes.
Yeah, so see, this one's got 5, and then this one's got 6, right? So those are 2 different clans, or 2 different icons, or obviously that means something clearly different. But these don't necessarily look totally like, they look like weird feet. They look like really weird feet.
Well,
Now,
he had 6 toes.
would it come out like him? Might. But see this guy right here? And how this, like an entire elk, it looks like it's coming out of his head? That's some type of plasma event. That's something that they've never seen in the heavens. And one of the things that I've wondered is, when you'll see the gods and the goddesses that are depicted, and they've got something on like this beautiful headdress, or a bird, or a falcon on their head, is that depicting the event? So now they're putting it in like a as above, so below form. Magic, ritual. A lot of the leaders are really into magic and rituals, and things happen on certain days because they're into the numerology and the astrotheology. And a lot of the gods and the goddesses depict astrotheology, whether it's a part of the zodiac wheel or it's a part of a planet. So that's my theory on some of these depictions here, with stuff coming out of their heads. Really.
Chris, can I derail you again real quick?
Please, yeah.
Back up to to the SquatterMan here at various parts of the world.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that suppose there was a plasma configuration that was showing up in the sky.
Yep.
It may be the case that you might see these different forms of SquatterMan depending on the perspective with which you're looking at the plasma formation. So it may explain some of the small differences when you see these glyphs.
Because they're in different locations of the world.
Right.
What explains Italy and Armenia?
Yeah.
Well, you can, and then you can prove this based on current scientific knowledge, because when people, aurora watchers, when they go out, they don't always see aurora. But the one guy standing in the right field in Wyoming sees it, but the guy that was in Ontario doesn't see anything. And because on that Birkeland current, the energy is moving around, just like the aurora is moving in the sky. You have to be standing at the right place at the right time. Everyone knows that. And one of the best places, obviously, is Iceland, or when you're actually up in you're actually in the Birkeland current sheath there. So,
like Norway even?
yeah, the odds of seeing something there are very high. In order to see it in a lot of these locations, it would be a solar storm that no one's ever experienced, obviously.
Yeah, way more than what we normally get with the northern lights.
And again, a lot of people that watch Rex and I are the videos, which almost no one watches our petroglyph videos.
Yeah, we get a lot less views on the petroglyphs. Now, the Akalu is, notice the Akalu is a eagle-headed birdman, and he's holding a bag here. He has what looks like a really nice watch and a pine cone. And people in Christian mythology and Christian beliefs, you've got the angels, the winged beings that are the messengers of God. And in ancient Sumer, it's not much different. The bringers of life were bird people. And whether or not they were really bird people, I don't know, but the wings depict that they came from above. Whether or not it's outer space, or another planet, or another dimension, or the heavens, or a different dimension, that's all, we can debate that a lot. But what we do know is this is the Me, the M-E, it's called M-E, the Me, which makes me think it's cosmic or the divine DNA. It's what makes people. The watch here could represent the soul. It's a flower similar to what some people believe the soul looks like. The pine cone would represent the pineal gland, which is our connection to God, which is our connection to Source. And he's coming down, giving us that extra connection. But also, what's fascinating is the Akalu are also sometimes referenced as the fish people. And Enki is oftentimes connected with the fish people and Neptune and the waters. But the Akalu were talked about in ancient king list, an ancient king list that was discovered in Greece, and was written about the time of Alexander the Great by It was by the priest of Bel Marduk. His name is Berosus, and he wrote a king list of 10 kings that ruled for 432,000 years, which is a sacred number, 432 hertz. And they actually came from the waters. They didn't come from the heavens, they came from the waters. And they describe a man coming out of the waters in a suit and teaching knowledge to mankind, and then he would leave every night and he would come back. So I find it so interesting that there's these two different types of kalu. Some come from the water, and some come from the heavens above. But some of the petroglyphs that we're going to look at can actually be like an archaic version of possibly the kalu. This was interesting. We found this in Fry Canyon area. You said it wasn't Fry Canyon, but was it Fry Canyon?
Well, it's back
But okay.
they're near each other.
Yeah, and I want to thank Alan. Alan's not here with us, but I want to thank Alan and on the camera, because he actually told us about this place. He discovered it a long time ago, and I'm really glad I had the opportunity to go out there, because we found in this area what looks like. I want to show this off real quick too. Is he holding a shield, or is it like is it a wormhole? Is it, what is that? And who is this guy? And what is that? We found this close to what looks like a Viking sailboat, or some type of sailboat right here. And this is in the middle of the desert. So you're in the middle of the desert, and what appears to be a boat with the sail down. And if you zoom in on this, doesn't it look like they're putting animals on a boat? It's so bizarre.
It's like Noah's Ark.
Yeah, it's like Noah's Ark. But we're in the middle of the desert. There's no water out here.
Another motif on there, if you zoom it back out full size, is that it looks like a seed or an egg. Keep going out to the right, and we see these like 8, 10, 12, 30 feet long.
Yep.
Some sites where you have that thing and a line that comes out, it goes the full length of the panel.
Sometimes it's horizontal, sometimes it's vertical.
Sometimes yeah. So that's very important.
And that's actually on this one too. That's on this guy right here. And that's a bad photo.
Yeah, it's a vertical there. You can see that long line there.
Yeah.
Follow it down and you'll find multiple circles.
Yeah, right there. Bang, bang. And then look, here's the ant dude again that we saw yesterday. We saw this ant guy yesterday, and here he is again. Yesterday we saw him with mountains behind him. Today he's at the top of this line. And then here's another ant dude right here, same guy. He's on top of this like plasma rainbow where all these lightning bolts are coming down. And all this weird looking plasma type stuff. But this guy, this is significant. This represents something significant. And then in Sankawi there's a guy like this, but he's looking forward instead of sideways, and there's this what looks like a wormhole thing around him. It could have to do with farming, it could have to do with the equinox, but it's very similar, but instead of just this half moon, it's actually a full spiral. Here's some more interesting stuff. We found this out by what could be a ship, possibly, like a sailboat. You'll see all this weird stuff coming out of his head. Here's a Space Invader guy right here. You ever played Space Invaders? And then this is possibly water or sound. I talked to some natives. They said if you see lines going horizontal, it has to do with sound. But that's kind of odd. And then here's another column, kind of like we were looking at over here. And then we saw a bunch of this stuff yesterday when we were out looking at petroglyphs, and also these guys. And the Ancient Alien shows will say that these depict, grays coming out of spaceships. And actually, I mean, it does kind of have that, profile. So I could see why somebody would think that if they didn't have all this other information. But now, when you look at the plasma stuff and the computer simulations, and you compare that to the petroglyphs, and you compare this to stuff that's seen around the world, and then you'll see this right here. Does this look like an alien dude? No, it looks like stuff. It looks like kind of thing. Like an effect of something.
Isn't that the double eyeball and the nose? Isn't that like a cartoon character?
Yeah.
It's famous? Yeah,
Squidward?
Squidward, yes. Yeah. SpongeBob.
In fact, if you go back one slide to where the petroglyphs that just showed, one back from there. One back from there. There, stop. That funnel guy with the head, with the swirls, if you move that picture to the left, you can see the experiment to the right on the Parat paper. His head is the top of the plasma column. And in my talk, I'm going to show you that at one stage of the plasma column, the funnel can light up exclusively, and then you get 2 eyeballs on top, and it's exactly that petroglyph. And they just added the feet and the arms or something to that, what they're looking at.
That top gray one there is at Three Rivers at least 8 or 9 times, and it's on one of the most prominent ones where the guy's sitting there. If you saw that guy, that's like a dude that's sitting there. It's one of the most prominent people. The big bug eyes. Matter of fact, I think that picture is cut from Three Rivers right there on the top gray one.
The top one, yeah, it is.
So I want to show something real quick. This guy right here, this is interesting. This looks like somebody with snake legs.
And same with the funnel guy has the weird snake legs.
But
I think what is unique is that we have 3 other Sumerian tablets from North America. The King Joseph tablet is the most studied.
Okay.
The 3 tablets that we know of that aren't this, I've never heard of this, are all simple Sumerian receipts for everyday normal nonsense.
Business transactions.
Buying 80 coats and pay rent. So if this one is unique, this is a very special tablet.
And if it is describing ISIS like it was translated, I had it's just a synchronistic moment where when I went out to the location where the Kincaid Cave is supposed to be. You've all heard of the Kincaid Cave. And it's a great story. It's a wonderful story. And so we went there, and I took out my aerial camera, and I got I got 50 gigs worth of aerial footage over there. Didn't see any cave. I'm not saying it's not there, I didn't see it. But what I did have was a very spiritual experience, and we were overlooking, I think, the Isis temple, which is a mountain. It's named the Isis temple out there, because there's names for different gods and deities from around the world at different timelines that were chosen. But I had a really spiritual experience that happened when we left there in Page that's connected to Isis. I'll just leave it at that. So if this is genuine, that changes everything. It's describing ISIS, and it was found in a mine shaft in the Grand Canyon. How cool is that? If this is legit, it changes everything. Yeah. So I told her I would love to have the tablet if they're gonna sell it, and so we'll see where it goes. But that's incredible. I think that's a really cool story. So that's basically is that the presentation? Yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Question and answers?
Kincaid Cave, is that in the cave in Grand Canyon?
So, and the story is there was a cave that was found, but they found actually African artifacts. And so, obviously, the Smithsonian didn't want any of that. So they came up with another story and said that they found Egyptian artifacts in a cave that doesn't exist. So, and I was given that information also after I looked from an elder of a tribe that, if I told you the tribe, I'd probably give it all away, but so he's, which sucks, because I really wanted it to be there. I wanted to go check it out. Like, I had people ready to go. I mean, we were ready. I spent lots of time and lots of money out there looking, and I was even going to do a raft trip. I was going to spend a month rafting down there, because literally you have to spend a whole month almost, like 3 to 4 weeks, and they're not letting you out. You're doing that whole trip down there. It's insane. So I spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of resources to find out if that was legit, and I don't think that it is. So about 95% sure that it isn't. Now, there are caves out there that they did find stuff, but that's not the location. Right. And there are Egyptian artifacts out there, and I think we just found out that there are probably Sumerian artifacts out there.
Right. Yeah.
So, we've seen petroglyphs that look like there's sailboats and trade with the Knights Templar and possibly the Vikings or the Phoenicians and Egypt. And then you look at the mounds, and if you consider the mound builders, they would bury the people would be buried with like relics, similar to the Egyptians. The Egyptians would bury their people with relics. And so I think that there's, they saw the pyramids, they were amazed by them, and they started to build their own here.
I think you can do that raft trip on a motorized raft.
Sweet.
I think you can.
Sweet.
Do it in a couple of days.
That's what I'm talking about. Now that's what I'm talking about. I'll do that for sure.
So does that woman have any record of them passing it down, like a date as far as being left that tablet?
That's a great question. I'll find out. Yeah, I'll find out all the information. Actually, I'll see if I can find the translation before I go, and I'll read the translation to you because it's really cool. The translation it's a really neat story.
Well, if you think about it, even if just one of any of those tablets turned out to be legitimately found in North America, and then you add it to the Proto-Sumerian bowl they found in Peru,
That's right.
that would place them in both continents, and then not only that, you have, and of course in South America, you have all the megalithic stuff with no writing on it,
Right.
which is similar to stuff in Greece, and then the Osirian, and then not only that, some of this information, we know it's precession of the equinox, so it's 26 to 52,000 years old. You can't explain how people like the Olmec just showed up, in the jungle with 52,000 years of star data, you know what I mean? So they obviously had a link to the old world where we know they were keeping track of it through astrology and all that stuff. And then you see so many temples in South America that look really legitly Hindu. The way they put the fangs on stuff and other stuff, so the style even changed by the time it got to the Mayans.
Well, you can see that it's almost like a combination of the two.
Yeah.
You're seeing like Egyptian style, right, and then you're seeing the other cultures like the Hindi and all that stuff playing out in the total effect. That's why it's not a fully closed pyramid. The Mayan pyramids have the open. The whole idea was that in the Egyptian pyramids, that the portal or whatever energy flow it's centered in the middle in the king's chamber.
Absolutely.
By the progresses. And the Mayan ones, it's up at the top.
Right.
So that's where all the people were standing performing the ceremony, and then everybody else at the bottom was supposed to emanate from the top down.
Yeah. If you really study the Great Pyramid of Giza and Teotihuacan in Mexico, all of the mathematics are the same, and both of them have an inner chamber, and both of them are actually pyramids built on pyramids built on pyramids, kind of like a Russian doll. But when you get to the center of the Teotihuacan, it's filled with liquid mercury at the bottom. So it almost makes you wonder, like the King's Chamber in China, the pyramid there that also has the liquid mercury.
Exactly.
If that, I don't want to get weird, but think about it, if you're an extraterrestrial and you wanted to hide something that you didn't think people should get to until a certain point in technology, you could hide it in liquid mercury. Anybody that tried to get into it would go nuts or die. And then it would be until a point of technology that they would know what it is, what you can do with it, and how to remove it safely to find out what's underneath it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, even getting pretty weird, like the German experiments with the anti-gravity and stuff like that, they were using mercury vortex, electrical charge in order to get it. So it's like maybe the mercury itself was the important thing that they were trying to, they're like, we don't want all these people wasting all this before we get back here because we might need this.
The Germans they for sure knew that there was something to that because they translated all the Sanskrit Vedic texts that talked about the Vimanas and all of that stuff. And so they were just trying to rebuild according to what was, and you could tell that the Germans were on a technological thing. 100%. And that never really stopped, matter of fact, if you pay attention to what they've been doing.
Right in World War II, all of a sudden they start shipping massive amounts of equipment and supplies and all this stuff to South America, and then you lose track of it completely in South America because it ends up in Antarctica where they're working on the bases.
Well, not only just that, but it continued into modern day. So if you remember in 2003, I don't know what you think about 9/11, but obviously Iraq had nothing really to do with it. But we went to war there. Right? So in 2003 was a 3-year. They made sure that they went in March, which represents the month of war and everything. But if you really pay attention to what that was about, they had just uncovered 250,000 cuneiform tablets and moved them to the Baghdad Museum of Natural History. Now, right after that, a guy named Saddam Hussein started going around calling himself Nebuchadnezzar.
Right, exactly.
Right? And if you know who Nebuchadnezzar is in the Bible, he's the guy with the Stargate. He asked the Jewish guys to come over because they couldn't figure out how to work, and it describes, how they had to wear special suits. They went in, came out with an extra person. They just said it was the Lord or whoever it was that came through. But then you fast forward to now, they find all these cuneiform tablets that go back to that actual time period in time, and this guy's calling himself Nebuchadnezzar now. And then the world just rushed to get in there, and we didn't go for the oil fields, we didn't go for any of that stuff, we'd beeline to the museum and then sat outside while people ransacked and supposedly, you know, stole all of the tablets.
Right.
But we just happened to be there guarding it to make sure that the robbery went off without a hitch.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then 2011, they did something similar. Nobody really knows what, but you had like Kerry, Obama, all of these people that went during the Arab Spring to Egypt and hung out in the pyramids.
So was it Zawad al-Weir or something like that? Is supposedly an Egyptian star that they discovered.
They did something weird there on 11/11/11, right? And shortly after that, satellite photos show a bunch of heavy equipment came in behind the Great Pyramid and dug a bunch of holes. They got something out.
I can personally confirm that I've seen the entrance to a huge underground complex that starts when you go underneath like the Great Pyramid complex and the Sphinx complex. I literally went inside, I went down the corridors, and then you could see, like, I didn't go any further because I didn't want like, the guards to like, get me or get lost or anything like that. Like, you turn the corner and you can see it opens up into, like, I'm talking like, it seemed like miles. I couldn't see where the end of this
Have you ever seen
passage was going. There's supposedly tunnels that lead all the way from Giza down to Luxor, down, you know, like, way down there. And it's like, I saw the start, but there was more stuff inside that room when I was just looking from like a 6-foot area than is on top, you know, in the whole plateau. It's insane.
Right.
Speaking of the city elder, he just texted me. He must, his ears must be ringing.
Right.
He's like, we're doing another podcast, man. In this big hole, where you can see where it came out, and it's a hanging canyon, so it's 80 foot off, literally like with giant waterfalls coming out. Wow. That was about 8,000-9,000 years ago.
Yeah. And it is in fact cold.
Freezing cold. And when you're in the bottom of it, you're like, oh, it's straight up a quarter mile on both sides. It's a slot that just eroded.
It's crazy how 3,000 years. Well, I guess it's different when you're adding water versus like taking away water, right? You know? But even in Egypt, you know, the Giza, that was proper rainforest until that rise.
So it's like very light.
Yeah, crazy to think of just.
It was wet all the way through the underdrive till about 10,500 years ago.
Exactly.
And that's most areas. Yeah. Just opening start. 2, 3, 4. Are we waiting for anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Should I go around?
Yeah. It should be my own.
Yep. I'm going to shut it now?
Anything else? Fine.
I'm going to go do it around.
So if you missed it, this paper you guys can get online. It's great if you're interested in the geology of where we were. It's a complete overview of the background geology that I talked about in the morning, about the gold deposits and how it relates to all the South San Juans. And it's a good resource because it's free. Most papers today you can't get access to because they're bought and paid for by big corporations. This one wasn't. And the unique area that we were at Three Rivers is unique because of the early study in the 70s. Like I said, for those that were on the trip, they cataloged over 21,000 petroglyphs at this site decades ago. And nothing's been done since then. Most of the native sites I go to, like Salmon Ruins and Aztec, and all these places that have been previously excavated where they found millions of dollars worth of priceless vessels and jewelry and all this, it's all, they just buried it all. And that's it. Nothing's happening there. You pay $5 to go walk on a mountain. And it's very telling to me because who agrees that we could learn so much by studying this? And just like in Göbekli Tepe, the same thing happened there. Klaus Schmidt was working on that for decades. He uncovered some of the most important archaeological finds of all time. And then he got sick, and then he died, and it all stopped. And then they opened it up as a UNESCO site. Anything that's called an UNESCO site, you should be very wary of. You should go see them, but when you're there, you should get a sense that there's a high amount of control at these sites.
Yeah.
They don't want you to know what it really means.
Exactly.
They want you to know what the narratives that they provide before you.
Yes. Same thing with the fact that you can't go into Stonehenge anymore is like bullshit. You're looking at it from like 300 yards away.
So the indoctrination is very high in all of these settings, and I think it's for a purpose. They want to get the most amount of people, tourists in there, to give them the most amount of narrative so that everyone has the story. Now, this is the beauty of the whole scenario with Anthony Pratt's work. Now, this paper came out in 2003, and Rex showed it to you. And so when Anthony Pratt was doing this work, he had his mission was not to make the connection between petroglyphs and high-temperature plasma. He had huge contracts with Los Alamos and Sandia Labs, where he had access to all this equipment to do these plasma experiments. And because he was compartmentalized, if you don't know about this, the compartmentalization of science began in the 50s with the creation of NASA and the entire conspiracy, the deep state idea that there's a shadow government controlling everything. They needed compartmentalized science so that the one scientist and the other scientist can't be sitting around at a table and actually come to a conclusion different than the story. And then by the 90s, all of the universities had separated chemistry, physics, and geology. Either separated the buildings or separated them by floors. So that multidisciplinary approach can't happen anymore. It's the compartmentalization of science at the same time that the National Science Foundation went from being an independent group of scientists to being controlled by the US government. And that was in about 1990, which is basically the end of science. So science has been undone since the 50s. And so you have Anthony Pratt, part of this whole paradigm, right? He's the top compartmentalized plasma physicist. He has access to this stuff, and he's doing these amazing experiments. Now, a little background on this before we get into the meat of the talk, which is going to explain to all of you all the types of petroglyph morphologies and why they occur. We have to go back to the beginning here. And this is interesting that Birkeland currents and plasma physics and cosmic rays all relate to Leoni's journey in the Oppenheimer Ranch project serendipitously, like not planned for. We found this perfect piece of land, and it happened to be Frank Oppenheimer's. And Frank Oppenheimer was the first person to suggest that cosmic rays are raining down on Earth and put the first cosmic ray detector up into the atmosphere. And he lived on the land we live on now. And like,
I didn't even know that. We didn't know that until a couple years after.
And then Svensmark's work comes out that cosmic rays force cloud nucleation, and that's all part of the work that I'm independently been studying since the very beginning. And it's all very bizarre, just like Rex Bear moving next to me. I never talked to him, and he just moved in, and he knocked on my door. It's very bizarre.
You're a day early. What the hell are you doing here?
He was. So let's talk about the Birkeland current. This idea of electric universe and all the stuff we're talking about dates back all the way to the 1900s and the work of Christian Birkeland. Now, originally, Birkeland currents referred to electric currents that contribute to aurora, and the one you're looking at there is the Jupiter aurora. And I'm sure you can all see that there's concentric rings there, some type of ring mechanism. The same thing happens in our Auroral Belt, and this is all has been witnessed in recent times by humans. The better our equipment is, the more we can see this. And these are recent pictures of the aurora on Jupiter. And this is after we saw the same rings on Earth. And now we're seeing auroras on almost all planets as the technology increases. Now this is after Christian Birkeland predicted that this would be there. It's almost like Velikovsky. How many people know of Velikovsky's work? Half of you. We'll get to that in a second here. But he's famous for worlds in collision and complete alternate ideas on cosmic catastrophe and catastrophism. So Christian Birkeland is just like Pratt, where he's doing pure science, and he comes up with this idea that there's an auroral belt. It's this cylindrical tube of currents that are moving. And decades later, it's proven by these pictures that there are these electric currents on other planets, including Earth. And so that's the point I want to get across here. Now, Birkeland current, in general terms, you can read it here at the top, are electric currents in planets' ionosphere that follow magnetic field lines. And nobody knows what that means, correct? Yeah. It's just the picture Rex showed earlier, where you can see the arrows in and out. You have a series of rings where energy is flowing in and out in tubes. That's all you need. So think of putting a bigger straw inside another straw. The smaller straw is the energy coming out of Earth. It goes to the sun or wherever it goes. and the other energy is coming in is in a different size straw. And so these are the layers that will illuminate based on different types of voltage. Does that make sense to people? This is a picture of the aurora on Earth, and again, you can see on this side the concentric rings, the in and the out.
Does that affect the magnetic fields? The Birkeland current?
The Birkeland current itself,
Yeah.
the weaker the magnetic field is, the more energy from space that can pour into Earth. And that is the whole idea of mass extinction and evolution. And when the field strength gets low enough, it's already dropped 20% in 100 years. It's predicted to drop another 20 to 40% in a few decades. So, if the magnetosphere gets that weak, the game is on for the electric sky. And we're going to see things we've never seen before, and it might be pervasive for decades, which is what these natives might witness. In which case, if you start seeing these crazy things in the sky for decades, it becomes a story and everyone writes it down. I don't think it was a fleeting moment where for a week there was a SquatterMan in the sky. Because people would have convinced themselves that they ate that peyote or something. So this has to be something going on for a very long period of time, all around the world, that everyone's witnessing. And we now know that aurora happens all the time. In fact, it happens on a 10-year or 11-year hail cycle, the solar cycle. During solar minimum, the magnetosphere is weak, and we get bigger aurora. Now we're going into weaker and weaker solar cycles, into a grand minima. Cycle 24 is the weakest in 200 years. This cycle is similar to that cycle. And it was weird, 10 years ago they said, you're never going to see aurora anymore. And then all of a sudden we found Steve and a white aurora and all these new auroras. And auroras are happening everywhere. The exact opposite of what the compartmentalized idiots told us. Which is always, anything you hear on the news, the opposite's true. Not 90% of the time. So this is just the background on 100 years worth of compartmentalized science showing us that these auroral belts are visible, they're controlled by the sun, and if we were to turn them up, according to Peratt, it would get pretty crazy.
Do you think that they'd be traversable in any way? Like if there's, like if one of those currents, like if it's leading somewhere, you think that like...
Maybe information comes in on this. It could be part of the Akashic record, it could pour in information from other parts of the universe. But like any of this hokey, candle lighting stuff is our consciousness at the right moment capable of understanding this?
Right, and that's what I mean. I'd be more like traversable in consciousness terms rather than like a physical.
Because based on the science, biologically we know now, just in the last 5 years, on new papers that came out, that 42,000 years ago is the lowest magnetic field strength since the last reversal, which is the Brutus reversal 750,000 years plus. That was a polarity reversal. But the magnetic reversal that happened 41,000 years ago caused the Neanderthal to go extinct, an entire lineage of hominids that had been here for hundreds of thousands of years through multiple magnetic excursions. But this was too much for their species to handle, and we made it through. And then Cro-Magnon exploded. And now here we are today. Now, I just did a study on Neanderthals. Neanderthals were the first group of hominids to actually civilize the Earth, because their sites are the first ones 330,000 years ago where they're making, I talked about a red ochre factory recently discovered in the last year, where they were making red ochre in huge amounts. And this is in the Shawinigan cave system. They found perfect preservation of these 7-foot dual-headed spears. Hundreds of them, and 6 or 8 of them that are perfectly preserved. 300,000-year-old weapons in a single location where there's hunted mammals that are being butchered, and evidence of that. So the whole, it seems like every year, the stuff that we thought 10 years ago was impossible is like, it's mind-blowing. Like, if you were in academia in the early 90s when I was, the first cities were 8,000 years ago, and that's when farming began. But if we were hunting and had ochre factories 330,000 years ago, I'm pretty sure they were farming.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they were farming something. Or there were permaculturalists like the Brazilian rainforest. They knew what they were doing. And it all comes back to this picture, like what did it manifest in the sky? Now this comes from the Thunderbolts Project, and this is the whole idea of, I don't know if you've all watched it, that we were all part of a brown dwarf system in a polar alignment with Saturn. So there was no rotation around the star. We were stuck in the southern pole of Saturn with Venus, Mars, and Earth in a line to Saturn. And when it broke apart, all this happened. So that's the Thunderbolt story. Does anyone have any question on that? That's as deep as I'll get into that. Because Peratt doesn't talk about that at all. And a lot of people want to know what's the dissection between Thunderbolt's project and Anthony Peratt. Well, all I have to do is read the paper. Peratt's paper, and we'll just go over the abstract because it's...
Wait, Doug, go back to you real quick. Sorry, I just want to ask you a question. Back to where you just were, SquatterMan. Okay, so what you're showing there, is that somebody looking at the conjunction of Saturn, Venus, and Mars?
Yes. This would be after the breakup occurs and it's pulling apart, and then you would have a magnetic instability as it pulls apart. The magnetism would be getting ripped apart. It would still be at the North Pole, and this would connect through the South Pole of Saturn, the North-South Pole of Mars and Venus, which are still up there, and straight through the North Pole of us. So it's like a string of pearls that pulls apart. As it gets pulled apart, they get ripped and back into our current sun, and they have to change, you know, you go from, you have to rip out and then go into the orbit of our current solar system. So it'd be very catastrophic. In which case you get the planets in close proximity whipping by for a few hundred years until it equilibrated.
Which would make sense of like the Venus flyby and, you know, carving out the ground.
But that's all Velikovsky stuff, and I'm not really going to get into that because Peratt doesn't talk about that.
But also, it's not clear the shading that doesn't. It's not the planets with the shade. That would be representing the plasma configuration that's caused by that breakup there. So that's the idea behind everybody seeing that SquatterMan
Yes,
in the
these
sky.
would not be planets. The planet is, that would be Saturn, and that would be Mars and Venus up there, and this is Earth down here. And the Berkeley current between the two would be getting charged, elongated, and then all these features would show up. Not just SquatterMan.
So that's actually a current right there in the center. And what looks like a planet is actually the...
That lightning bolt goes straight through everything.
So that ball right there, that's in the top ring,
It's a plasmoid. It's
okay, so check it out. That looks just like what we were looking at yesterday. Or what I was showing just a minute ago, the Arizona petroglyphs that had the ball and then the line showing.
And we'll get to that in Peratt's paper where he explains that.
Wow.
Right, and so this is the kind of thing where if you looked at it from like another perspective, it might look slightly different. So where you might see a SquatterMan that looks a little bit different.
Like maybe you'd only see it from like the profile, and then you only see like the line and like the two circles.
So we're not going to walk through baby steps. This will become, at the end, you'll be able to look at this again and be like, oh, I get it. So now Peratt, before he published this paper, he's doing these experiments. He created that funnel. And then some guy comes in and is looking at his experiment, and he's like, because this guy was like an anthropologist, or he was looking at petroglyphs in there. And he's like, I've seen those. And then Peratt's like, what? And doesn't believe him. And then they get together and they have, dinner, and Peratt's convinced. He's so convinced that he gets obsessed with it. And within a year, this paper is published. He has no background in archaeology or anthropology or anything. He's a fuddy-duddy. And so this paper comes out, and he immediately becomes a quack, but he's at such a high position that he kind of goes in hiding, does his own stuff, puts up Plasma Universe, his own website, and kind of goes into hiding. You can't find the guy. He's now in his 80s. We tried to get him here, but nobody can contact him.
Did you ever get back to this?
No, nobody knows how to come back. He's still hiding. And he might be in the end of his life. So the abstract says the discovery that objects from the Neolithic or early Bronze Age carry patterns associated with high current Z-pinches. The high current Z-pinches are what he was creating in the lab and looking at. And then because I talked to some dude, he says here, that this Neolithic unexplained art, including petroglyphs, I can explain. That's pretty mind-blowing. And when anyone read this, they were like, this guy's a quack. Because you have to now unbelieve everything. And you know how hard it is in science to unbelieve everything? It's impossible. It takes 3 decades to change a paradigm, even after everyone agrees it's true. It took 3 decades for plate tectonics to finally be in school. And this comes to Velikovsky again. In science, unlike religion, the great revelations lie in the future. The coming generations are the authorities, and the pupil is always greater than the master. But in the main paradigm, that's your master is your professor who doesn't know what he's talking about. And so there's this really slow process of actually learning stuff, which is why you people are so unique, because you're here and you're getting it way ahead of time. It's way ahead of the time. And that came from Velikovsky. He says that all fruitful ideas have been conceived in the minds of nonconformists. That's all of us. For whom the known is still the unknown, and who often went back to the beginning where others passed by, sure of their way. And the truth of today was the heresy of yesterday. And this is basically the premise of Rex's channel, right? And all the work we do. So let's all learn together what all this means, or how it even forms. The first thing that you can do, anyone can do a topical study, if you just want to prove it to yourself, and this is one of the first things I ever did. Someone sent this to me about 8 years ago. And they said, do you know where this comes from? And I said, no, I've never seen anything like this. This is a petroglyph in Chile. And that was the email I got. I don't even know who the person was. And then the next morning I woke up, and this was the email he sent me. I said, that's the same dude. And he said, yeah, that's in Russia. And that's when I started to look into the petroglyphs. Because how does someone in Chile 800 years ago draw this? You know, it's a kid doing graffiti, and then someone in Russia draws that. It looks like the same kid picture, right? Because it's not really a person. Just like we saw when Rex's talk, they knew what people were, and the stick man was clearly not people. Well, these people probably knew what people were, and I don't think this is a person either. Would everyone agree?
Medusa.
It's probably where that came from. It could be the Venus story, but it doesn't matter.
The Venus story.
What matters is that this is in two sides of the earth at similar times, and I'm sure the people didn't have a cell phone. Right? So what is going on? This is a shape that you find in Wyoming, which is clearly a concentric rings with dots. This is an archaic petroglyph. But when I saw this, does anyone know what a lingam is? Yeah. This is where it came from. It came from a weathered petroglyph lying on the ground, and now it's a lingam. Or the lingam is a representation of this petroglyph in a sculpture. And no one has ever made the connection that these archaic glyphs, which are supposed to be 11,500 years old in Wyoming, are lingams, or the representation of what lingam was. So this is Wyoming, and this is Three Rivers. And these are the same representations of concentric rings with dots around it. Does everyone see the dots in this here? Yeah. Okay.
It looks like there's more than 12, so that...
Well, according to what we're going to get into in the plasma physics, each ring you get has more dots based on the charge. You can see all the rings. You can see 3 rings, 1 ring. It depends on the charge. But what's clear is that all these people know the same geometry and patterns, and where are they learning this all from? And that brings us to these petroglyphs, where then we have the SquatterMan. This is one of the other unexplained glyphs worldwide that's in the northern and southern hemisphere. So the next 20 or 30 slides are going to walk us through what Peratt was doing in the lab, and starting with the funnel. Now the funnel was the first thing that he was able to create in the lab. A friend brought his attention to the similarity of the images that were generated in the lab to what he had seen on the surfaces of rocks in nearby New Mexico desert. And this is 2 funnels. These don't look like anthropomorphs. In fact, this one looks like Santa's belt with fish legs, doesn't it? And that might be half of a fish, or a fish man with arms, because this is the top of the experiment. So that's a pretty this is like the first connection. And then once they started to ramp up the experiments, which lasted a period of months, the future slides you're going to see will be mind-blowing. And this is just to give you a better visualization of what I was showing you in the beginning of how this Birkeland current energy comes in and out of the poles at a ring. Does that make sense? Upon reaching the Earth's particles travel down the polar cusps. This cusp is a circle that can move. It can get wider or thinner, or like we saw in the beginning, with the aurora having concentric rings, there could be multiple rings. So you could have multiple rings of auroras. And if you turn it up high enough, these rings could go all the way equatorial. So that means that if you, depending on what ring you're in, you could be seeing different forms in the aurora. Does anyone have, does that make sense? Depending on your latitude, you'd be seeing something completely different. And so, if you're all waiting for this to happen, and it will, as the, let's say we have an X80, and we're waiting for the energy to come, it's going to slowly build up. So we'll first get normal aurora, which everyone knows the sky will become colorful. But then the main Birkeland current, or the sheath, is going to start to twist. And this type of twisting is going to extend up. It's not even, let's say, towards the moon. It's going to be thousands and thousands of miles off of the surface of the Earth so that anyone on the Earth can see it, even if you're at the equator. And so when you, as you turn the electricity up, you're going to get aurora, and then the entire sheath will light up for thousands of miles into space. So anyone would be able to see it. And this is where you can see a representation, potentially a Parowan gap, of this spiral. But we also saw the DNA strands at Three Rivers. And so the spiral then becomes a whirl. And the spiral is the center of the Birkeland current, which is now whirling around one of the shells as the power comes up. And we've all seen, I think Rex even showed some snake petroglyphs like that. Mm-hmm. This again is a Parowan gap. And so when we're looking at Parowan gap here, it's kind of interesting that there's other types of snakes. As you go to the right, it's more chain link, and then you get a ladder. As if there's different forms that they started doing it, and then the last one was the snake, and that was the important one. And that could, in fact, be one of the levels of the excitement of the current. So then the current kinks as we're turning it up, and we have some examples of that at Sago Canyon.
That's the snake man off of, that's by Moab, and it looks like it's got a snake inside of him, and also very similar iconography overseas. One of the mythologies says something that describes that pictograph.
And what's all, does everyone remember Rex showed one that looked like a squid? And that could be just half of this being excited?
Yeah, they call that, actually that's called intestine man. That's what they call that petroglyph, intestine man. It looks like there's intestines inside of him.
Well, and then it looks like intestines to the right.
Yeah.
All right, so we're still turning the plasma up. It's still coming in. We're approaching X20.
X20?
Yeah.
Like an X20 flare?
Yeah.
Okay.
Directly at us. And then you get what's called synchrotron, where it syncs up and you start to get the Z-pinches. This is the idea on how stars form. Stars form in the Birkeland current at a Z-pinch in a much bigger scale than this. So what they would see is a string of pearls above the North Pole. As it syncs up at very high temperature plasmas, you get the synchrotron radiation, and you're going to get 6, 7, 8, up to 9 pinches. And it first shows up as glowing balls. And you can see the associated rock art in the Grand Canyon. This is a pictograph, unexplained.
We've seen a lot of those like that are strings of pearls places.
Yeah. And there doesn't have to be a particular number. It could be whatever you're witnessing at that location. But everyone will see a version of it. And this is where it all happens. So here's the Birkeland current coming from Earth. This is what they call the funnel region. So if this illuminates, you're going to get those giant funnel petroglyphs. But this is what's happening next. We're going to get some of these anthropomorphs lighting up. So we started up at the aurora here. Then it went into a spiral. Then this twists. Then this might shut off, and then the funnel illuminates. This is as we're turning it up. And in this funnel, what do you think forms in the funnel that's pervasive that we talked about? In that triangle?
All those dudes.
The duck head. the duck head forms up here. Here's the guy. Here's the duck head. And we're going to, and this is again as we're turning it up. So we've turned it up. We've got the Birkeland current. We've got the spiral. The funnel may illuminate now. But what's happening during the synchrotron is that the Birkeland current is starting to rotate and become visible. And that's where we might get the guy with the head that we saw in the very beginning. And that region's called the outer rim. So once the outer rim starts glowing, we will probably all need to be in caves on Earth. Because the amount of radiation that will be outside will be crazy. And there's a depiction of this type of display, and it happened, take a look, 1868, which was painted 9 years after the Carrington event. So this was witnessed during the Carrington event. That upper cone illuminated. It was a type of aurora never witnessed before ever. And look how they have flowers up here. And so this is just 150 years ago. They still didn't know how to depict it. They had no idea what they were looking at. And so this is, so to then make the leap that the ancients are drawing this in the way that they're drawing it, and this is modern art, it's not very hard to do. And here you can see the outer rim was quite prominent in this representation of aurora, seen in Norway, October 18, 1868.
Does everybody know what the Carrington event was?
And then we can get to some of the more oblique views. So it's in my opinion that these are the entire plasma column they're showing. Every part illuminated through the Jacob's ladder, up through the cone, and then they're actually looking up at that rim and that circle. This is actually the depiction. Here's the column coming up. If you're looking up at it when it illuminates, you get these concentric circles and these fingers and maybe some facial features in here.
You know that one that's second over top? No, second picture. Up one. That looks like one of the, remember when we went to Farmington, we saw those petroglyphs that they got rid of with the actual power tools, but they were circular?
Yes.
And I thought to myself, that looks like the Perot one, and that Perot one looks like that, and right there, this is the Perot instability paper, but then that looks like the chief's headdress.
Sure, now why, if you're a Native American hunter-gatherer, awesome hunter, in tune with nature, why would you wear a giant leather thing with all these feathers under it? Who gave you that idea?
Yeah.
It's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. But it became the chief. But it didn't, some guy didn't say, hey, let's wear this 30-pound thing with feathers, man. They were trying to personify the god in the sky. And so if you illuminate the entire plasma column all the way to the top, you'd be looking up into, this is the representation, artist representation. But these are clips from the Columbia River. And then there's pottery all through Mexico that are the same, that's the same exact depiction.
We've also seen a lot of glyphs where there's like a column and like the column is grooved, kind of like the octopus man that you showed a couple of slides back.
Yeah.
We've seen that everywhere.
Does anyone need more time on that? So when this is happening, the central column of the axis is illuminated. The Jacob's ladder is probably off at this point. That's the whole rest that connects to Earth. And we're now getting high temperature synchrotron, and now the ring is glowing. So we literally look like Close Encounter of the Third Kind, maybe like a pink ring with 57 dots around it. Totally trippy. And then we increase the power, and then you get an area in that. So here's the ring spinning, and then that face illuminates underneath that they could have put there, but then you get a duck head feature in the center of the funnel. And now the funnel might be illuminated here with the duck head on it, and it would look like an anthropomorphic duck-headed person. And this is just based on the experiment where the duck head would come from, because in the experiment the duck head showed up after the ring. So inside the outer rim of the polar cusp, you can find the stagnation region, and this would glow a different color. So you would have this anthropomorphic figure of one color plasma with a stagnated duck head that then lights up red instead of purple. It would be a mind-blowing experience, unlike anything that a native, that's living in the forest could imagine. And I imagine the way they kept their head about it is to anthropomorphize them, right? oh, it's just God. It's something I can't explain, but I can explain it. It looks like a duck.
And the bird iconography.
Say again?
And it's a lot of the bird iconography.
Yeah, and so the Egyptian version of the bird head is a much higher artistic value than a certain Pueblo group did it.
Yeah,
because they were different artisans. Yeah. But they're drawing the same thing.
Different cultures, you know, so yeah.
They still use that today, like the top of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. has Lady Liberty with the bird coming out of her head that looks like the duck head. They still use that everywhere.
And you can see here different representations. Up here, I think this may be Sago Canyon. The duck was bigger. The stagnation region could be bigger than the cone. It could be smaller than the cone. But we've seen bigger anthropomorphs with small duck heads and smaller anthropomorphs with big duck heads. And this just proves that what Pratt found is that the voltage and the position is different. So you're going to see a bigger duck or something like that. It's what you would expect from the experiment to find in the petroglyphs. And this is the one time where a hypothesis is being 100% held up by the rock art. And nobody wants to touch it.
This is a particularly interesting panel because you can see the different stages of how much energy is coming through. Right? You've got the circle line, you've got the string of pearls in there, you've got the duck heads.
Right, so this is the synchrotron radiation and the rim exciting, and then maybe a week later, the rim is gone and the duck's there. It all happened through a period of time that they're trying to depict.
And there's even the guy with the multiple ducks.
Yeah.
3 ducks.
And like what happened up there? Triple duck up there, and then what is that?
Yeah.
That's the Cocopelli. Almost. In fact, he's playing a flute. It's like a duck playing a flute. And the Cocopelli has to do with this as well. And so you can see down here from this depiction that other things were happening down in that the Berkeley Current, which is thousands of miles long. It didn't always have to be a SquatterMan. There were other things going on here. Help me. That's it. Okay, we talked about the funnel. Between the outer rim and the top of the ionosphere, a plasma sheet forms a visible funnel at in one of the, let's say, voltages. And these are all coming from, all this information I'm showing you here comes from auroral papers prior to the Peratt experiments. This is from 1984. It's decades before. They had already worked out what would be happening up here before anyone tried to connect it to the petroglyphs. And when you go back and look at the papers, it explains it all to you. But nobody wants to touch it, except us, and 12 of you listening. And so and then here's more examples of the funnels. And this is interesting because let's put some time frames to this. All the stuff we looked at yesterday is between 900 and 1200 years ago. And a lot of it has got a lot of these morphologies in it. We saw the Jacob's Ladder, we saw the SquatterMan, we saw funnel glyphs, we saw circles and dots, we saw DNA, the spirals. Those were probably an event that happened shortly before they were made petroglyphs. And we have an event called, who knows it? The Charlemagne event, 774 AD, which is a solar proton event which was between 50 and 100 times stronger than the Carrington event. And this would have happened. But guess what? We lived. We're all here. So that's a good thing. Now these are in Horseshoe Shelter. These are estimated at 6,000 years old. And 8,000 years ago there was another solar proton event. So there are multiple solar proton events that can all correlate to these different cultures seeing the same thing in the sky. Now, so if you're thousands of years removed from this and in the same area, and you've been looking at these, you're like, well, that's the Elders. And then the Charlemagne event happens, and it all happens again in the sky. Then you're like, oh! And then everyone puts the petroglyphs on again. And we see evidence that these forms are from 13,500 years ago, from 6,000 years ago, from 2,000 years ago, and from 1,000 years ago. And they don't have to be one event in antiquity. They could be the event happening again and again and reminding people, we now know what that is. It's the gods in the sky. We must have been bad. Or good. Who knows? So now let's talk about the plasma spheroids. Inside the funnel, you can get the synchrotron lining up like we saw. And so you would have the funnel lid and the plasmoids in the funnel lid. You can also get spirals and kinks in there. All of that, any version of that at the same time. And this is, if we're looking at a distance from like the moon, what it would look like from the side. So there's the SquatterMan up there. You can even see that could be the duck head. This is the entire plasma column. There's Jacob's ladder. And so this gives you the scale of all the different visuals. Only this may light up at one time and you get a Thunderbird. Then the next day this might light up. Then you put the ladder on. And then some version of this and you get a giant amorphous triangle guy with a head. Is this making sense to people now?
The whole thing looks like a snake.
Maybe when it all lights up, it's a snake with a snake head. Exactly. And then we get to some of the old...
Would that be the Nagas?
Huh?
I wonder if that'd be the Nagas. The Nagas are the ancient serpents.
They gave knowledge like the ancient Vedic culture.
Huh.
So maybe during the Younger Dryas events, one of the earliest events, it was a very snake-like plasma. Because each of these events are going to be... All the 6,000-year glyphs are all giant 8-foot triangle anthropomorphs of creepy nature with an alien head and 2 eyeballs, with the Wajinda. So this event was different than the recent event, which is all stickman and SquatterMan and ladders. The recent event, which I think is the Charlemagne event, and all the stickman we see, that was different than the 6,000-year-old event with the big triangular anthropomorphs. They didn't get stickmen back there. The 6,000-year-old pictographs don't have any stickmen. They don't have any SquatterMan. They just have the triangular anthropomorphs and the duckheads.
Hence, that's why they'd be bigger also, like the one in Sago Canyon.
Well, why would they be bigger? Can everyone understand very quickly from that picture why they would be bigger? Because these are the smaller glyphs. This one with the anthropomorphs up here would be a gigantic feature of the sky. Because the funnel widens.
Same shape, dude. Why they don't have arms, maybe.
So Pratt did 3D supercomputer graphical simulations of what the synchrotron, the plasmoids would look like, and then when you start to look in between them is where you get those strange lines and the alien eyeballs. And this is all based on a big word, magnetohydrodynamics, because plasma flows just like water. So you're going to get the water-like effects, ripple-like effects at certain temperatures or voltages, which explains all the petroglyphs going back almost as old as we can go. It explains all the patterns in all the Pueblo cultures, because all of a sudden we have the Anasazi pottery with all these amazing patterns. And people are like, where the hell did they get that? Because all of a sudden there's no pottery with some boring pattern, and then all of a sudden, 850 AD, everyone was an amazing pattern artist? Like, how does that happen? And no one has an explanation for it. But if they witnessed this in the sky and saw these patterns occurring, it would be easy to mimic. And it would be beautiful. So you're like, let's worship the sky on our pottery. Because that's always what the natives were doing. We're trying to worship the earth. And so that might explain all of the different types of patterns in Mimbres and all the pottery in the Southwest, including some of the creepy eyeballs like this. Look at that.
The bottom left is a Celtic symbol.
Just alien.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that yesterday. I told you. Yeah, I saw that on the back of.
And it shows up everywhere.
And I'm sure there were no Celtic people with the Hornata Muggy on.
Yeah.
So somebody's seeing something. And then multiple stacked creepy heads. Images of 2 or more faces are recorded in the plasma sheet, because inside these plasmoids, the dots on the left in the experiment, just like the instability that gives you the duck head, you can get instabilities inside, which are going to look potentially like creepy faces. And on the right, some aboriginal, these are very old, like in the 20,000 year range, where it would suggest that probably in great antiquity, and I mean, if the entire plasma sheet, all the way up, the whole thing lights up, you get that. And that could be 41,000 years ago, when the Neanderthal went extinct, the biggest magnetic perturbation on Earth for 1 million years. So that would have been a big event.
And that fits in with your headdress, what you were saying about the headdress, and also what Rex was talking about Nagas. If you look at all the Nagas represented, they're a cobra head with many little skinny snakes coming off, just like that, like the head portion.
Yeah, and the only outlier, unique ancient culture, would be the Dogon, who don't wear headdresses. They wear literal SquatterMan on their head.
Yeah.
So do the Apache here. Actually, the Apache.
And they're all representing the same thing, the top of the plasma column.
Right. But the Dogon are also unique in their own way. Didn't they have like an extreme knowledge of the Sirius system?
A and B, the rotational habit.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you guys are here, if you look at some of these Mescalero signs, they'll show the Kachinas up there, and they have this white stick on their head, like the Dogon. It's a SquatterMan, and it's right on top of their head.
I saw that. I was like, wait, what? Straight
Yeah.
by.
We're going to end on the Kachinas. Imagine that. So as the energy increases, the spherical plasmoids will spin, flatten, and then develop donut toroid shapes. So we've been increasing the energy the whole time. And it turns out, and I thought the opposite before I did any of this research, that SquatterMan would be the weakest because it's everywhere. And in fact, the Z-pinches collapse, and the last phase would be SquatterMan only. And that would scare the shit out of me. And this all comes from the work in 1984 on the aurora and the plasma toruses involved.
Actually, to be more precise, it's 1978.
Yeah, the initial ideas.
Yeah.
And so, just like the stacked toruses or the plasmoids forming, there's lots of anthropomorphic, and this is what the region we're looking at here. You can get, there's lots of different forms of that. This is a California version. Tampenvi, I don't know where that is, but that's definitely near here because of the type of varnish. And then another California version of that. You don't have to believe me on any of these are just suggestions. So with an increase in energy flow, the number of toruses start to merge, and they go from 9 to 7 to 5. And we've seen stacked people separated by plasmoids, all kinds of stuff like this. And then this is very indicative of what we saw, that DNA down by the giant sheep with the alien on top, these DNAs. So these could just be versions of the stacked toruses. Now what the people mean here on the sides, again, it's anyone's guess. They might be seeing this near where they hunt bighorn sheep. We have no idea what the actual message is.
It could also be like Rex showed an image that had a lot of animals around it. It could also be astrological placements, or perhaps they indicate where they're seeing it in the sky.
Yeah, it's the Oak Canyon, Utah one with the SquatterMan pooping out a plasmoid sitting on stacked toruses. This is what you would see. This is what the paper suggests, that every version of this is possible, depending on the amount of energy. And it would be, unless you have done research, hard for someone to say that this is the same representation as this. But can anyone sitting here now see how that's could be? That was the purpose of this talk. So here's, in the end, the perfect representation of the stellar Z-pinch, which is in the center. This would be connected to the North Pole of Earth, right around the equator. This would be the column where all these great things happen. This is a cross-section of it, which you could see if we're looking up here. You would see those dots. You would see the concentric rings inside. And this could be visible anywhere, depending on, or what size it is, depending on anywhere that's lit up. And then you can, if this is thousands of miles all out of Earth, you can see the whole Z-pinch, what part of the SquatterMan the Z-pinch is. The SquatterMan extends the furthest reach away from the pinch. It's the whole picture. It's the big picture. So when that baby is all on, all the stupid stuff in between, this Jacob's ladders, the plasmoids, all that goes away. And all you're left with is the ultimate. So if this is all happening over a period of decades or hundreds of years or again and again and again, it's going to be a good reason why people all around the world are recording this. And then that brings me to these Kachinas. Because there's not just 7 Kachinas. Like in the Zuni, there's hundreds of Kachinas. And this is different anthropomorphic personifications of that plasma column in the sky. Maybe for one event, during all the forms. But what the natives then do on top of the god is add their stuff, right? They have to add their cultural stuff. All these Kachinas are wearing either cultural sashes or cultural beadwork, which has nothing to do with the plasma column. It's just how they make it theirs. And so all this revelation to me has only happened in the last few months, and I think I've mentioned some of the Kachina idea, and even you reinforced it with your talk. That I think that the further we go with this, the more we're going to be to unravel and uncover what the meaning of their religions was and why.
One of those looks like a robot. Yeah, very similar to the petroglyph we were looking at. They look kind of like a robot. You see that? You got the blockhead, right? So the blockhead would be similar to some of the columns that we've checked out, and then all the feathers coming out. That's big eyes. The big eyes.
What's interesting is this guy, which is a Hopi Kachina, was just photogrammetry pictured on the roof of a cave in Alabama. So one of the pictures is of a square-headed anthropomorph with a single horn and a sash, which is tied on the right side, which is that Kachina. And there has never been a connection between the Southwest religion and the Eastern cultures, ever. But if you look at those cave paintings, where I just did a podcast on it, or just put in Alabama cave art, you're going to find that one of the and guess how big that is on the ceiling of the cave? It's the largest cave art ever found in North America. These are 9-foot Kachinas on the surface of the cave that's 3 feet high. So they had to lie on their back, little natives, could have even been the moon people, to draw 8-foot tall anthropomorphs of that god that the Hopi revere. And this is in Alabama.
And that looks just like the ones we're looking at, and say the big ones. The oldest one's got the same headdress and everything, identical. Maybe those were the Kachinas that we were looking at on the big ones. The robot big. Those are the Kachinas.
Those are the Kachinas. The first Kachinas.
Wow.
And so I want to thank you all for coming. To answer any questions, but as soon as we've done this, we can hang out alone in the other room, and then we're going to come back here for a Q&A that can last as long as we want. So everyone can take a smoke break, or are there any questions in there?
We have quantum mechanics to explain things on the micro level, we have relativity to explain things on the macro level, and it's like incredibly clunky. You have to keep switching models to explain something, and that's the beauty of electric universe theory, is the scalability of it all. That you can take the same concepts and apply it on every level, and it makes it extremely convincing. There's an example in a paper that I read a long time ago about the example of take like a dollar bill being dropped off of a skyscraper. You need like 5 different types of science to explain that. You need Newtonian mechanics, you need fluid dynamics, and a bunch of other stuff to explain that. That is incredibly clunky, and it's not real life either, right? That you have to kind of keep adding variables to get the appropriate description of that model. And to me, this just makes electric universe theory that literally can explain everything. It probably would even explain the origin of gravity. Like at this point, I no longer believe that gravity is a force unto itself, that it is a function of all of these electromagnetics.
It can't be. We know, and this is another thing not being revealed to you. We have no way to get to the moon, but we got there. The only way we got to the moon, and it was never revealed to the public, is to recalculate the math every 15 minutes on the way there.
Because that's the kind of modeling we're using.
Because
you can't capture all
the physics that we have based on gravity was wrong every 15 minutes. And the way we got there is to say, okay, go left, left, left to left, right, left, and then we landed. But prior to that, they knew. They said, we don't know how to get there. You can shoot at it, but the moon's moving thousands of miles an hour, and you don't know if there's anything in between. They didn't know.
And that's still true for space launches today?
All of it.
Yeah.
To get to Mars is going to be hot shit.
Not
And the
to
amount of
mention all
cosmic rays, everyone's going to die.
Well, and imagine all the space junk that we got floating around our planet too.
Yeah,
You
right.
clear all that
Do
before
not
you
get
get
all
out
of
of
that
there.
too.
And that's another eventuality of all this. If and when something like this happens, a large solar event, and let's say something blasts towards us, it's going to push everything in between us and the sun into the Earth, which is going to be tens of thousands of satellites, millions of pieces of debris. Most of it burns up, but anything over 18 feet doesn't. And there's going to be a lot of pieces that are big.
Yeah.
And those will hit.
And at that velocity.
And so it's becoming ever clearer that the Younger Dryas event, in my opinion, Graham Hancock was right. And I actually sold him out for years. But I think a large comet may have come in. But it broke up because we witnessed Shoemaker-Levy 9 break up into 9 pieces. This comet broke up into 9,000 pieces. But the main core kept going to the sun. The rest is re-entering slowly. You have the Carolina Bays, pieces of it hitting. You got Hiawatha Crater, big piece hit, boom! But what we know in the last 10 years is if a piece of a comet hits the back of the sun, the front explodes in the CME at the same time. So it's a cause and effect. But we've only seen little ice-guided comets hit, and they form a C-flare. Bang! So what if we had a 1,000-mile wide comet hit the back of the sun as it came in? Boom! It would shoot out the kill shot.
Right.
We'd watch it. And this would be after thousands of things already hit. So all these things would hit our... We'd see the comet coming, and the end of the world, then it would hit the sun, and then the sun would outburst. And so that is something we can look forward to. Anything is possible. All right, let's go smoke. Any questions? Magnetic reversal news is like 10 minutes. And those are all of the...
And those are 7 feet tall?
The largest cave art ever discovered in North America. They were discovered 4 decades ago, but no one knew they were there. They discovered the cave and some art in there, but they were doing some studies, and a guy was looking up, and he's like, what is this? And then they used that photogrammetry technique, and clearly you can see it reveals.
So he's experiencing events like, where am I going to survive this event? In the cave.
Yeah.
We said that's a 3 foot high thing.
The cave, he's in the cave, right there.
Yeah, wow.
That's the highest part of the cave.
The drawing was the lower point.
No, the cave is on the ceiling.
Was there
It's on the ceiling.
No, but I'm saying it was even tighter squeeze where they were doing the painting.
No, they did a study. The cave floor is 4,000 years old, and these are only 1,000 years old. So it's the same cave.
So is there any chance this was vertical when it was carved?
No.
Because I mean,
It's
there's a lot of
recent.
stuff.
1,000 years ago, I
Okay.
think. You'd known about Alabama, it shifted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but they did a cave study on the floor. It's 4,000-year-old floor. So it hasn't been wet. It's just.
I was about to ask you, is it possible that the floor was filled in a little bit? Just from some erosion.
That's one of the key parts of the study.
Yeah.
Were they standing?
Right.
And they certainly weren't. So that's really interesting to consider. And those are all of the images that they found so far on the ceiling. They're not small. These are all 2 meters. They call this the rattlesnake, but it certainly looks like the spun out plasma that goes into the whorl and then bunches up into the intestines. That's the same.
Yeah.
It's the intestines inside the womb.
Intestine man.
Yeah.
That bottom one looks like the bottom left looks like the breakup. You know when the dance.
No, you're right. Don't worry about it.
Saw it in the actual.
Here.
The actual picture of it.
Right.
So what do you think that Kachina's doing? Because when you broadcasted that, I kept thinking how ironic that the Petroglyphs looks like a guy making a petroglyph. The middle one.
Yeah.
It looks like he's banging something on there. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
And also the symbol at the bottom right there, that looks a lot like what we're looking at, the wormhole looking.
Super spiral.
Yeah.
Super spiral.
Yeah, super spiral. Super big bill. In Sago Canyon.
And then the one other place that Rex and I were allowed to go, and then the elder just sat in the car and he said, up there. It was literally like, and then between us and up there are signs and barbed wire fences and no way to get in.
He actually texted me.
I guess we gotta climb the fence.
He just texted me. His ears must have been ringing. That was the guy I told you about, the video.
And this is
wow.
I've seen that.
And these are the same Kachina. Well, not the same, but the same. So this version is a painted pictograph version, 300 to 500 years old, after they have pigments from the Spanish. And this shows you, whisper down the lane, how far it goes. It's
See the horns on that one?
Yeah. So what you first see in the sky, then you personify as a god, then you glorify as a god, then some guy's making dolls out of it. It gets more and more innate and more attuned to the culture. And we saw that guy because they had the, remember the costume of that guy?
Yeah.
And the gods speak through the snapping noise.
Yeah.
And so snapping noises would be like lightning or atmospheric lightning.
You know, I was going to ask this before, that they have that particular cheetah. There's also a blue one that has this really elongated thing where its mouth and nose goes. You think that specific one is maybe like depicting the duck head? Because they have the one Kachina that's different than all of them, where the nose, mouth area pokes out real far, like that one.
There's a duck sticking right out of his head right there.
Yeah, and then there's a blue one just like that has a big duck thing.
And that's a cannabis leaf right there. But I want you to draw your attention to the obvious. Obviously, these are not real. Look at the eyes. They're the same plasmoid circles from the Wajinda. Like, why would you draw an eye like that if you wanted to draw an eye? These people clearly were good artists, and they were depicting something else here. And so that's a mind-blowing place. I hope we can go back to it.
18th century anime. There.
Is that in northern Arizona?
It is on the Zuni reservation, in the Zuni Pueblo, like 8 miles from his house. Right?
Yeah.
Just across the road and move.
Luckily, this area though, they don't have you don't have to go in through a guard tower.
Yeah, this is on the outskirts of the Pueblo. Rex and I experienced something very strange we should probably share with you. We were allowed in here as white people for an event that white people can't see. And so we had to be hidden. But the very natives that were also coming into the Pueblo were not allowed in unless they were like quadruple vaccinated with their papers. What? We're sitting in the back of a car unmasked. Everyone has masks on. This is the peak of the thing. And there's all kind of tribal police, and they just speak some Zuni. They look in and they see white people with no masks, and they just let us in.
So we saw.
But people that lived there couldn't get in unless they were triple vaxxed with all their papers and a mask on.
Wow. And it was our elder friend that got us in there. So
totally
God bless Greg. That was so cool. But what was interesting is I thought to myself after, I'm like, oh wait, just wait till the news article comes out.
2 unmasked, unvaccinated white men show up at the Zuni reservation, and everybody gets corona.
And guess what? We hung out with the family in the house. I touched everything. I sneezed. I coughed. I farted. Nobody got sick. We didn't bring any blankets though.
We made some great friends, and the Zuni fetishes were incredible. And we had a chance to meet Greg's brother, and they took us in, and they showed us. It was a really beautiful experience.
They didn't want anything to do with us in the beginning. They were very standoffish. I gave a few people some joints. And then they tell everyone in the house, because the whole family's there, right? And that got around, and then the women were mad that I gave joints to all the dudes. And then I was like, I didn't know, and luckily I had 18 joints, so I gave them to everybody. And then they were making dinner, we were at the dinner table, we were allowed, remember? Then we were like, come on in! Yeah. That's some fried bread!
It's all about the gift offer. You come in and like, thank you, you know?
Do they allow white women to come in?
Oh yeah, they wouldn't care.
Because I've always got, every time this comes up, it's always like, you guys are invited, I'm not invited. And I'm like, oh, I guess it's...
They didn't want a group of it. I wasn't even supposed to go. They only wanted to sneak one white guy in, but then they said, okay, I guess we can do 2 white guys. Which isn't racist, by the way, because I'm white. All right, so this is a Q&A about anything we want to talk about.
I'm curious, you said when it's happened when this plasma come up, could you see this from the equator from both ends?
If the full column was all the way illuminated, it's so high, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Is there any petroglyphs on the equator?
Peru.
Peru? Okay.
Northern Peru. There's tons of equatorial glyphs. But the SquatterMan is found in the northern and southern hemisphere.
Well, I knew you said that because it's in Australia and stuff like that.
Yeah, if we want to get esoteric, if you haven't researched, and I told one person here, Mario Build Reps, he has a YouTube channel. He's been doing his own independent study on pole position. And and I believe he has the most scientifically sound theory on what's happened over the last 500,000 years. That the crustal slip occurs, in my opinion, the big cycle is the 104,000 year cycle, and the last one occurred, the Younger Dryas event. I can pull that up here.
You know what's interesting, and you know we've talked about this a lot. I wonder if the story of Shamash breaking up when it did and creating, you know, this change in orbit, knocking Earth out of its axis, etc. If that happened, then how would that be a part of the normal cycle? That doesn't seem like a normal cycle to me. That seems like something that way outside of the norm of these catastrophic cycles that take place. So now that we're in a different location in the universe, in the solar system, orbiting a different star, are we going to be a part of a different cataclysmic cycle now?
Probably. I mean, it's not that different than the story that Velikovsky told, right? The story that he told in Worlds in Collision is that Venus was a comet that ended up in our solar system, caused all of this chaos, and literally reordered our solar system.
Right.
So I mean, what it suggests is that there's a larger pattern in the galaxy, right, that is connected to the Birkeland currents.
Yeah. So
and that sometimes eventually knocks something out of whack.
This is 440,000 years of the highest resolution proxy data. It includes CH4, CO2, temperature proxy, O18. The way they, and solar insolation, which is assumed at the bottom here, which is the Milankovitch cycles, the brown on the bottom. And this is basically proves that the Thunderbolts project idea is could be true or couldn't be true. And now let me tell you why. This proves that what's been happening hasn't changed in 500,000 years. And then my field work as a field geologist, I looked back 500 million years. So I took this scale and looked at 1,000 times longer. And everywhere I went, there's this same exact signal. Doesn't matter how far back you go. So the signal probably doesn't have anything to do with Earth, the position of Earth, or anything. It's coming from somewhere else. So, and we just got to the galactic center. There's 7 plasmoids there. They just revealed the picture of the black hole in Sagittarius B. All bullshit. But whatever's happening and emanating from there is this. This is the signal of the Milky Way galaxy. We go in a different galaxy. There's different proxy data. This is the signal. This is the resonance of our galaxy. It's going wow, 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 wow. And every 104,000 years, this is a major fucking event. If you're here on this line, you probably won't make it. The last one was 12,900 years ago. The Younger Dryas event here. And so, in the lead up to that, okay, so this is 100,000 years of ice age. It gets colder and warmer, and colder and warmer, colder and warmer. And these are what are considered the precessional cycles. So this would be one great year, another great year, another great year, even though they have 2 spikes, because there can only be 5 great years per 100,000 years. It's only these events that are the ones that, that last one was the largest mass extinction. It killed 60% of all megafauna on Earth, everywhere except Africa. So Africa must have been in the shadow when whatever blasted at us did it. Because there's still rhinoceros, giraffe, and all kind of crazy animals that are nowhere else anymore because they're all dead. We had all those in North America. We had bigger, badder things, right? We had 9-foot cats and 12-foot bears.
Giant horses before.
Yeah. Giant equus.
Yeah, exactly.
Huge, stomp the shit out of you. And so something happened here recently during that uptick. And so it didn't happen, it hadn't happened since 100,000+ years ago. That was the last Younger Dryas event. And then another 100,000 years was the last Younger Dryas event. 100,000 years before that. So that is the major event that Ben Davidson is claiming is happening now. That he thinks it happens every 12,500 years or 26,000 years. Okay. But there's no geologic evidence that a major catastrophe happens except every 110,000 years. You can all see that here, right? Yeah. We're here on the right. This is present. This is the bullshit CO2 narrative, which hasn't caused any catastrophe either. So the last catastrophe is over, and then what we have now is 100,000 years of it getting cold. It's actually 86,000 years of colding until the next Younger Dryas event. Now what Mario shows is that on these flexure points, the crust may slip. So what he did was he looked at all the megalithic foundations of all the megalithic structures like Baalbek and pyramids, and just simply pull from Google Earth the azimuthal plane of the edges. And they all line up into 3 packages. They all point to different north rotational pole positions of Earth. The oldest being Baalbek, which would be back here, almost 330,000 years ago. That was already built based on the position of the North Pole during this 100,000-year cycle. So Baalbek's base could be 500,000 years old. This is before Cro-Magnon took over, so what hominid is dominating Earth then? Probably not. They were making spears and ochre. We know Neanderthal, in that cave in Shonigan, were making spears and ochre, so there's a different hominid making giant megalithic platforms. And that may be the missing DNA. Didn't you just talk about that? So we now know that there's missing DNA that we don't know.
Right.
When you get back into the older 50,000-year hominids, we don't know what's missing DNA.
Yeah, but didn't they,
it's there, we don't know what it is.
The Denisovans, right, is another...
We know Denisovan DNA is in there.
And then there's the Homo floresiensis, which were like...
Many people.
But then there are probably some giant people.
Heidelbergensis was a big person.
Yep.
But they went extinct somewhere in here.
See, now this is where the space traveler...
And then we got...
well, they don't even mention the 3 ghost species in our DNA. They don't even name them. They're just ghost species.
Yeah.
Heidelbergensis died somewhere in here, probably down in here. And these are all major events. The only way you can get that cold is if the sun shuts off. The only reason we're safe is because we've been in solar max. This warm period, the sun is maxing. It only maxes for 10,000 years every 100. And we're in it. These are called interstadials. This is when everything's good, everything's good, everything's good. The rest of the time, everything sucks. Because it's extreme, and the sea level drops 300 to 400 feet. And there's big ice, there's huge glaciers everywhere. The Rocky Mountains had ice caps all the way down here into New Mexico. It's still hot as shit in the desert, but there's ice caps. So every spring and summer, can you imagine there's melt seasons? Nobody's living by the side of the creek. They did that for a while until everybody washed away. So it's very difficult. What they found was that all of the ancient cultures during the last ice age lived on the margin of the glaciers. Because that's where all the natural resources flop. That's where all the fresh water melts out. Right on the cusp, where the glaciers melt out, the mountains is where all the life was. The first cultivation of any crop is cannabis, dated 14,000 years, at the edge of a glacial moraine as it moved back, as we were melting. They were cultivating cannabis. Not the kind you smoke. Who knows what they're using it for? Probably seed protein. Because that's where you get hemp seed protein. So, this is what we're dealing with in the bigger picture. You don't really have to worry about any catastrophe happening, a major catastrophe, a mass extinction. But we drop off. So this is the beginning of the ice age. It's called the sea level fall surface. And so for the next 80,000 years, we enter a new environment that remains the same geologically for the whole time, with small fluctuations.
I just want to throw in here too, if you consider that this is the signal for our solar system, or you said galaxy.
Galaxy.
Is it
The
really
Milky
galaxy?
Way galaxy. It's emanating from the galactic center.
Right. So I mean,
the galactic current sheet is light years from us. So if something happens in the galactic center, it would take years to come out to us.
Well, but also consider that every galaxy is also going to have its own resonant signal, which creates a really interesting phenomenon, right? Because if you've ever seen like a wave function with another wave function, you add them together, then you get like a whole new pattern, right? And there's a signal for the even larger pictures. It's just kind of fascinating in that regard.
And if you think about it deeper, we can't ever advance more than about 100,000 years.
Yeah.
That's why we have this evolution.
We have to keep starting over again and again and again.
And the last start over was just 12,000 years ago, when everything that we worked for 100,000 years trying to stay alive in an ice age, as it got colder and colder, and then it all got destroyed. But it was warm, so we're naked, and we're like, oh, we can make it? So that's why we made it, because it gets warm, and we can be hunter-gatherers again and live in caves.
And I think we get these collective amnesias. I think we go through these cycles because it's part of our learning as souls.
The
same way that we have
Well, I
amnesia
think
when we're
also-
reincarnated.
Yeah, I think also just the sheer level of trauma that's probably associated with a catastrophic event like that, you know, it probably adds like a species. It's kind of, you switch it off so that no one has to like go through that again.
Right. If you think about the cave art at Lascaux in Europe, these are Cro-Magnon that are living at the worst part of the ice age. This is the deepest it gets, the most ice on Earth, the lowest sea level, all the land bridges are open, and it's hard to live. This is when the most enlightened art is being painted in a cave. The Lion Man carving is 40,000 years old.
Yeah.
So it's happening here in the bottom, where they're, and I think that somehow there's no language. Everybody's telepathic. There's no way you can have high art and all this with no language. You're not drawing pictures of animals and frescoes of constellations in caves without communicating. So some other paradigm is happening back before the reset. And who knows what that is, because almost everything was destroyed on Earth. Like, we have the remnants at Pumapunku, and we have the remnants at Ollantaytambo, and where the megalithic pieces are, but that's less than 1% of what was. Because 90% of everything is at sea level here on Earth, people. Everything was 440 feet under the ocean. That's where it is.
So do you think that...
A place where no one can scuba dive. It's the most... You can go deeper than that easy, but this is a zone that's too turbulent for anyone to go to, too deep, impossible to study. It's perfect cover-up. There's nothing there. If we were to go down and search between 300 and 400 feet on the coast of the Earth, you would find so much.
There's like an entire city off of the coast of India, underwater, that the government won't let anybody visit.
The reason that's so shallow is because it's been lifting up for thousands of years.
There's a city off the coast of Cuba, too, that had like over 150 pyramids.
Yeah. And this is all part of the cover-up, so.
Yeah. But do you think that we're heading, we're heading towards the trend where you're saying that the sea levels are going to start lowering as
they recede?
So I think in these next years we will start seeing, you know,
dead bodies in Lake Mead.
Yep.
In cities offshore.
Yeah, and that would be quite interesting. I'm sure, you know, it's probably going to happen on a scale where not many of us will be not likely to be here, but it'd be awesome, you know, for the people that are to see that.
And then if you think about it in terms of the Greek mythologies, you're going to come down here, and this brown curve is the Great Beard. And so this is how many times we become psychic and stupid again.
What's the line connection?
Trying to connect it to proxy data.
Yeah, okay.
Which is, you know, a theory based on actual data. The proxy data is the further you go back, it's the more interpretational it is. This data is so good that it can't not be real. What people did for decades, graduate students, is go into these ice cores and with a syringe sample gas that existed on Earth at that time the bubble was formed. And can you imagine how many graduate students it took to get graphs like this? Millions of studies, millions of data points. So these are pretty high resolution. And then they corroborate it through with other proxy data, like tree rings can go back 8,000 years, which is barely this much. And then we have other types of proxy, like pollen, because we know when certain plants live. And you overlay it all, and this is a pretty good idea of what's going on here. And based on my geologic research, this signal goes back all the way to the beginning of life. Because you can go in a quarry and see the same pattern.
In the beginning was the word, man, is the sound, is the frequency.
Sound, yeah.
And this looks like frequency.
Yeah, it does.
Or any other.
Well, I mean, they've recorded what planets sound like, so if planets sound like something, obviously you can expect the galaxy to sound like
Well, and this is interesting because Velikovsky suggested that the sound of God was planets in close proximity. Because if you move a planet from close by to another planet, it would make a horrific noise. That would be like a screeching, like a oh, and it wouldn't stop. It would be, it took a year to come by, the trumpets. It would be a year of that. It would, people would kill, some people would kill themselves.
Yep. In Revelation,
Or go hide in the cave.
in Revelation, it's specifically, like if you read Revelation, it talks about these events that are going to take place, and the trumpets, and the angels, and such. It's actually talking about astrotheology, and it's talking about events that take place in the heavens, possibly asteroid strikes. But they knew about the astronomy, And so they put it in prophecy. So instead of thinking, you know, like it's astrology, they think it's prophecy. God told somebody to write it down because it's prophecy, they write it in a book, and so this must be coming true. But really, if you're smart and you know about the stars and constellations, and you tell somebody, you know, you write it up as prophecy, and then you create this book that is supposed to be the Word of God, and it's a great way to hide everything in plain sight. But most of the mythologies were actually written or translated by Freemasons, which is there's a code that you can follow that code, and you can actually decode it to understand how much of it does break down into astrotheology. So like the mythology is talking about Kronos eating his children. What if that was Shamash blowing up, eating planets around him, right? So, and then Jupiter, Zeus kills Kronos, right? So does that mean that Kronos, or does that mean that Shamash gets too close to Jupiter, and then that causes Saturn to explode, and then Jupiter launches out Venus somehow?
Well, Jupiter doesn't even have a surface. What we're looking at is not a surface. There's only a solid central core. Jupiter's gigantic. So a planet would travel through that apparent surface, it's gas, and go right into the planet and disappear until it hit the core, which could then eject and be Venus.
Well, and don't forget there is...
and then it stays in there as the new core.
Right.
Because you would need a new core.
Who's born from Zeus's head?
Athena.
Athena, thank you. Yeah. So,
And is Athena connected to Venus?
No, Venus is Aphrodite.
Okay.
But Athena
Athena was with Mars.
She's a war goddess. She's the wisdom goddess.
Yeah, Mars.
But she also was the goddess of like
cereal.
She was a virgin goddess, and she was not a love goddess in the sense of Aphrodite, but like she had a different aspect to her that was a love thing.
So that I would say is Venus then. That could be the battles of Venus and Mars, right?
Yeah.
Mars is war and like primal instincts and such.
Right, and Venus is the softer side of the same kind of thing, yeah.
And so, but Venus then turns into Medusa, right? Because of all these plasma.
Yep.
So this would be the cometary phase of Venus.
Yeah.
After it's ejected, it comes in close proximity with Earth and Mars. Mars has to be close enough to Earth because the Mayans the Mayan god of war is Mars with a scar on his face. So they were able to, they didn't have telescopes.
Well,
they were able to see this planet in very close proximity come by.
So this is where the reason I disagree with that. If they can build megalithic structures, they can certainly build an telescope. Just because we don't have a telescope,
we would. It wouldn't break down.
But
lenses are made of quartz.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't mean that somebody else didn't find it before us. It doesn't mean we won't find one in the future.
I don't think that there's not natural ones. Like if you got a piece of yourself, a piece of granite or quartz that was big enough, you could potentially use that. But you'd have to like happenstance across.
How does that watch this? If you have the math, if you have the math and know-how to make perfectly aligned megaliths and build civilizations around stars and constellations and show these planets, I don't buy that it's because they were so close you could etch it out on a piece of paper. They had to have some technology or capability to look at those planets and those constellations, or that knowledge had to be given to them somehow.
Yeah. Well, I think also you're saying that we go through the levels of being more and more psychic. So it might be easier to review, pop out of your body, go explore, be in connection with people that might be on that planet.
There is zero connection in the modern world on architecture and optics. The Masons, all they needed was 3, 4, 5. And I'm a Mason, so 3, 4, 5 is the simplest math on Earth. You can calculate everything, perfect geometry, knowing 3, 4, 5, and it's a triangle. And you don't need to know anything about optics or planets to build a perfect pyramid. Nothing. And so there's no connection between needing optics to building perfect. It's not even in any Masonic book, optics.
But I think, if anything, the pyramid was the telescope.
Yeah.
You sit in there, you get your consciousness charged up, and you zoom out and you go explore.
Well, now we're getting into speculation.
The Pueblo people, it's not speculation. We know.
We know we can go out of body. We know.
I've had out of body experiences, but you're still speculating they're using that to see the planets.
The Pueblo revered the 18.6-year lunar standstill. They didn't have telescopes, but a shaman knew when he was standing by Chimney Rock that it was coming, because he was watching for a decade, that the sun was coming to the standstill, and he came up through those spires, and he ordained that they build
Chimney Rock.
the keeper at the spot. He knew it was happening. Right. He didn't accidentally stand there. He knew it was going to be there, and then it happened, and he built it. So they had advanced astronomical capability, but that's just because there is no, everything was a dark sky. It's not like today.
Yeah.
It was so dark that it would have been amazing just at night.
They said at nighttime, back before all this shit, it was about as light as it is about at 6 a.m. 5 a.m., 6 a.m. That's how light it was outside at nighttime, before all the light pollution.
And that's what
like that. And you would be looking into the entirety of the Milky Way.
There'd be meteors coming in every morning.
Well, in South America, every single one of them is an observatory platform at the top. Every one of the main pyramids from Mayan or Aztec have a platform for star viewing.
Yep.
And then if you go back into the Chinese myths, the three-legged crow.
We also have things like the Yuga cycle, right? A 26,000-year cycle where we're, sort of lowly evolved and then we become higher evolved, whether it's around morals or intellectual stuff or technology and perhaps even things like telepathy. So maybe it's like when we're in because it goes bronze, silver, gold, so perhaps when we're in the gold range is when we have this kind of, some people call it direct voice, sort of like a form of telepathy, right, where we're literally downloading information. It might help explain things like the Dogon, who knew about Sirius. There's the theory that they were visited by aliens, and that's why they knew about Sirius B. Right. But perhaps they just downloaded the information.
Yeah.
Well, what's the significance? Like, why Sirius B? Why not some other?
Don't know.
Right.
There's I think when they talk about getting knowledge from the teachers that come from there, maybe it's a meeting of halfway. It's you're sending your consciousness out, they're receiving it, and then teaching them the information that when they come back into their body, they're able to apply and write down and utilize. Sure.
Well, DMT aside.
Or even, Rex, what I was telling you about yesterday, this other book that I'm reading about the journey of souls or whatever, and the idea that sometimes we potentially reincarnate into other life forms, other worlds. Maybe that's the reason that there's some communication there. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there. But.
Well, how do you think the Sumerians knew about Uranus and Neptune, their colors, and how they were tilted and things like that they shouldn't have known without a telescope either? Astroplane, I mean, they explain it also through somebody coming from outward inward. But how did they describe it? How would they know that Uranus itself is like tilted on its side gravitationally? They wouldn't know that from observation. And just the Olmec calendar itself, like how did they have the entire procession of the equinox knowledge? But they just showed up as far as civilization goes in the Yucatan. They just showed up. They had 26,000 to 52,000 years of history from where?
Right.
So anytime that there's this reset or something major happens, clearly there is an influence that helps bring civilization back up. Whether or not it's just in our consciousness and our DNA, or there's actually outside influences, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, maybe extra Earth-like. I don't know, but there's something out there. And maybe that's the Achiji or the bird-headed people that I was showing you guys. Maybe that's their representation of like a spiritual deity that actually helps rebuild civilizations after these cataclysmic events take place.
Well, maybe it's us. Maybe we're all part of the great oversoul. And oversoul, we are all part of God, and we are like erecting our own learning experience.
Well, and think about the alcohol, the emerald tablets and stuff like that. With Thoth going out to Egypt and sending other enlightened priests from Atlantis out to go raise civilization again after this cataclysm.
So the higher civilization was smart. They went into a cave. 8 of them made it. They came out. They weren't dumber. They were just looking around. They said, "Oh, there ain't shit."
Yeah.
And then they walk around and they found a bunch of new tribes, and they're like, "Here,
let's show you how to protect it." I mean, we know that like the fall of like between dynasties and other like lineages from different civilizations, the priest class generally hoarded all of the information towards the end of that time or whatever. The king was before they passed on to the next king or whatever. The information would be hoarded by the priest class and only left up to their interpretation when they were giving the information back.
Same thing happening with The Last Druid. The Last Druid, if you watch the movie from the 70s, it's free. I put it up on Rumble. You can find that the Druids, they're teaching, they work their whole life to learn everything, all knowledge on Earth, which is how to grow, build everything, sacred geometry, everything. And the reason was because they knew this was happening. The Druids knew that this clock cycle existed, and there was going to come a day when only a few people who had to know everything were going to make it. And that is the whole idea of the Druids.
And it's the same with Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah.
Right? We had an entire civilization literally bury this place, which is surely chock full of non-symbolism that we don't understand yet.
That city that was completely built underground. You know, this huge, this huge.
Well, that's to survive this.
Yeah, no,
but,
exactly.
But let's get back to the astrotheology. We have Mike and Dank on all the time. He's brought to light to me that the Bible, the Word of God, is astrotheological information. And because what Randall Carlson did here is he put the astrological world. This is the precession of the equinoxes. These are all of the original science. And what is the purpose of it? What is the purpose of a culture understanding a 26,000-year cycle, astrology, and then encoding it into the Word of God and crazy stories that if you look at it through this, simply mean you got to plant in August, you got to do this and then. You're like, well, that's not very telling. They're not really telling us anything. But then if you understand this clock and then the Bible, it's telling you that we need to be the last Druid, because it's all going to end. It ended here, and then it ended 26,000 years here. Everything ended again 26,000 years later, and again and again. It's been happening every 26,000 years. And halfway through the 26,000-year cycle is a 13,000-year flexure point. This is the sea level fall surface. It's also called Heinrich events in geology. It happened 26,000 years ago, it happened 52,000 years ago, it happened 104,000 years ago, and now we're in this blue dot, is today. Didn't happen yet, but it's going to happen. It never doesn't happen, because the last graph I showed you is this same thing.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say, right? It's cycles,
the clock of the catastrophe. This is finer grain.
Well, you a little bit all of a sudden now
and the Noah flood is here on the midway.
Well, you guys saw that the other day, right there. That's painted right on the rock. I mean, literally, that exact same thing is on a glyph.
It's the Celtic cross. It is the 4 elements. It's the 4 symbols. It's the 4 winds. It's the medicine wheel. It's the soul.
It's the
swastika. I think it's the swastika as well, simply because the swastika has that rotational geometry, which would suggest that it has motion, like a cock.
The oldest symbol. You can go back, I studied symbology like 13 years ago. The oldest symbol you can go back to is the fleur de lis.
Yep.
And that is a plasma discharge. It's almost the SquatterMan.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what the fleur de lis is. It's the Boy Scout. It's
Yeah.
the oldest symbol on Earth. The first one ever made. Why would you make that? It's not something, that's weird.
So you can imagine trying to explain all of this technical stuff and astrological stuff to the masses, and it wouldn't make no sense. So you tell them other stuff, like beware of the water bearer and stuff in a book. Okay, it's Aquarius, so they're telling you exactly which time you need to be paying attention to in a children's version for the masses.
Well, but that's only for the people who can read, and that's the thing is, I feel like...
Which is why they made the Sphinx. You don't need to read to know that there are people who are doing Leo.
Yeah,
right. Let's make it a woman.
But that's the thing, but I think that switch going from carving these Neolithic and megalithic and monolithic structures into copying down into these codices and stuff was that switch of hiding the information from everybody and only a select few.
Well, it might also just be being hidden for the purposes of protecting it from the next catastrophe. Well, possibly.
Possibly.
But I look at Göbekli Tepe that way, right? Because that's the reason it still exists. I mean, we've had too many catastrophes since then for that to have survived. Well, not necessarily, but...
Many people interpret the amount of languages occurring and being a lot of languages is the dumbing down of a species. We're all on Earth.
That's the Auroral Belt.
There's 8,000 people that all speak different. I can go somewhere and I don't know what the hell anyone's saying. That's stupidity.
Yeah.
We could probably just make up 10 words and all understand what we're saying, the whole world.
Yeah.
But
when you consider
we're not there anymore.
When you consider how many languages are related to each other too, so you're like, okay, well basically you guys are
They
connected
were
here
all
somewhere.
speaking
Yeah,
the
exactly.
same until they stayed apart.
Yeah.
And now we, Republican and Democrat, it's like, this world is based on division, misinformation, and deception. We live on a slave planet now. Nobody is doing anything that their soul body was meant to do. And we're stuck because this is how we have to survive. We have to have a job, we have to pay our bills, we have to wear clothes because we're cancer.
Okay.
Do you think that humans were designed for this life right now? I doubt it.
No, man.
We're not supposed to. What other animals wearing clothes?
Yeah,
We're the aliens.
And has to wipe their ass.
Yeah, you never catch me wearing clothes inside my house, but like, you know, I just can't go outside like that.
But so the zodiacs, one thing that's fascinating is if you read Epic of Gilgamesh, it describes how Gilgamesh had to fight off these lions, giant scorpions, he had to fight off the ram. Those are all zodiacs, right? And in order to reach immortality, he has to make it to Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim is connected to the age of Aquarius, which is also connected to the age of man, or human, or woe-man. It's the age of us. It's
now.
the age of right now.
Just started.
So that makes me see the parallels of we reach this age, now we have infinite opportunities. So each time we change the zodiac wheel, we go from a different cycle, we're also changing power structures. So the whole power structure, the people that are running the show, they don't want this age of Aquarius. They want to keep the age of Pisces going, or the age of Taurus. You know, the Old Testament was written in the age of Taurus. The New Testament was, no, I'm sorry, Aries. The Old Testament was written in the age of Aries.
Right.
The New Testament was written in the age of Pisces. And now in the age of Aquarius, which probably means the New Testament will be written. But if you go back to the ancient Sumerian stuff, which is before the Old Testament, that was the age of Taurus, which is the age of like megaliths and build like huge buildings and huge structures. It's all connected, man. And so they just take that information and pass it on from one clock, from one zodiac to the next. So now we get to the age of Aquarius. The power structure says, no, we're not going to have that. So what do? They create this new situation to put people in the machine, put people in the system. Could be the precursor to Matrix, pod people.
And if the pole has shifted 4 times every 100,000 years, it is the Vostok data that proves that to us. And then I started getting Sumerian tablets and dabbling in Rex's insanity. The Sumerian Kings list is the proxy data.
Yeah.
Go back 435,000 years or something ridiculous, right?
432.
Yeah.
And so these are the cycles of the kings. These are the Sumerian king cycles. And I wonder, are they 100,000 year reigns?
No.
110, or do they vary?
They vary, but they're all very long. They all rule for a certain amount of SARs. Each SAR equals 3,600 years. If you follow the 10 kings...
So each of these quarters is 3,600.
That's right.
So they're just describing this.
Well, look, Rex, check this out. You know how you were just talking about how the age wants to keep the next age from... Well, just look right there in the Bible. You kind of said it. You have Moses, Aries. He's always represented as a ram. Yep. He's mad because everyone's still worshiping the bull, Taurus. Yep. So the time was changing. That's why he was upset. The whole society was trying to keep in their age, and he was trying to show them the new age, right? Yeah. And then you get to the time of Pisces, which is the 2 fish, right? And they over and over again with the 2 fish. All of these, including Hindu, all talk about this time. You can do Mayan, 2012. It starts Aquarius. This is all this clock. I mean, in every single religion, they have this encoded into the religion. So like what I was joking about is you saw this exact iron cross right over there at 3 Rivers. It's on there and it's the cardinal directions. And if you look at the tilt.
What did they know?
And that's actually the symbol I'm talking about is like asterisk. It shows all of the things right there, but it also has the tilt of the earth there and the 4 seasons on how they angle across right there. It's like all encoded into this asterisk symbol.
Also, this is sort of a lot like a lot of the tribal shields too, like the Ojibwa have, a circle that's divided into 4 sections.
Yeah, but theirs is tilted this way.
That's true. But there are other shields that are not.
So technology, that's good. That's their new religion. That's the new scriptures. Merging man
it's
with
merging
machine.
the biology with the machine.
And then they think that's going to create this like utopia, and it might for some.
But imagine
But then
being
it
stuck in a
keeps you-
machine.
Exactly.
I mean, they've taken time experiments, and you can turn like 1 second into years.
Oh, they're,
So-
they're talking about applying that for prisoners, where you can make someone
Yeah.
think they served like a 1,000-year sentence in an hour.
Yeah.
And completely drive them insane, I guess. I don't know.
Nice.
Yeah.
But you could be
You
out of
can
the
sit there for 1,000 years, and it's been an hour. I would probably just die on the spot when I came back. Thanks, but
Welcome.
Don't accept any chips, anybody.
Yeah. Chips and dips. Your copy.
Anybody have any more questions or want to go on any other avenues? This is a lot to absorb.
Yeah.
If you haven't absorbed it.
You know, I was actually thinking, so earlier when I mentioned about traversing through the Brooklyn currents, like, do you think that at the point, if you had one that was like fully charged, right? They're up in the cave and they pop out a body, that they could just go in? If you said information could be transferred.
Supposedly, when everyone sleeps, we're just not psychically capable now. Your astral body travels to your point of origin, and then you come back into the body before you wake up. It has to do with REM sleep. So, if
You
this
see
is-
from the solar plexus.
Yeah, and if this is a low phase of that, we have to change the cosmic environment to understand how to do that. Some people can astral travel right now.
Yeah,
It's
right,
the
they
same
can just-
technique, they don't need a wormhole.
Yeah.
No, I've had out-of-body experiences, and that was prior to believing this kind of stuff. Like, I had 2 the same night, and I was falling asleep, popped out of my body, scared the crap out of me. At that time, I was kind of religious, so I thought I was going to be possessed by a demon or something. So I woke myself back up, and I did it again. I started to fall asleep, popped out of my body, and everything is like it is here, but it's a little bit more shades of gray. So that's the only thing that's different. Is for me, it wasn't as colorful, but everything was real.